Maverick News, the antivirus program for your mind. And now, the Freedom Reporters.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rick Walker. This is the Maverick News Channel. We are the Freedom Reporters.
Good afternoon. It's Brennan Kennedy, co-host of Maverick News. Good to be here. Happy Friday.
And we have a special guest lined up tonight, Mr. Scott Ritter. He is a military expert, a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer who was also a UN weapons inspector, and he will be joining us a little later in the broadcast to discuss the situation in Ukraine. We are excited to have Scott join us tonight. He is an expert, and he will be, I think, sharing a lot of insight and valuable information. It will be constructive and productive, and it's a privilege for us to have him joining us this evening. But we have other things to talk about as well, not the least of which is the People's Convoy, which we continue to follow. And today there was a new development because 4 trucks actually made their way past some of the police barricades, which are in themselves controversial and have actually been creating the traffic jams around Washington, D.C. Not the trucks, but the police have been causing the traffic jams. And today, 4 trucks made their way past those barricades somehow and wound up down in the heart of D.C. So that was something new. So we'll show you some of that. And in Ukraine, we've seen some developments today as well, where the U.S. has said they're going to be sending in some drones, giving Ukraine some drones in response to Zelensky's request for more support and more lethal weaponry.
That is really escalating. Holy smokes. Are you surprised we're still here? Like, with the...
I don't understand. What do you mean?
Are you surprised that Russia's still in there and that things have gone this long with the whole Ukraine story?
No.
Or do you think...
What were you expecting?
I'm not sure. I was thinking maybe I thought initially it was going to last a little bit shorter, but I think this is going to be a long time to come at this point.
No, these things never... The media was trying to make it look like, create this impression that Putin was going to go in there in a blitzkrieg style operation and just roll over everything and get in there quickly and take over the country. But no, I'm not surprised it's gone this way at all. I think it's unfolding exactly the way the Russians anticipated that it would. I think the only thing that's prolonging it is Zelensky's determination to defy the Russians. And I think he's doing that with some encouragement from the West, from NATO, from the United States. And he's doing it because he's getting more support, more military aid. And that's dragging this out longer than I think it needs to be drawn out. I think there was a solution, a path to a solution early on. I don't think it even needed to happen.
No, it didn't.
I honestly don't understand, and maybe Scott Ritter will shed some light on this tonight, but I don't understand why Zelensky has been so adamant about keeping the country neutral. By doing so, you preserve your sovereignty, you get to keep your country, people stop dying. You know, if it's a neutral country that's disarmed, it's not under the influence of NATO, the United States, or Russia, you remain a sovereign nation, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on arms because you're neutral. You get to save all that money. You could be putting that into schools and infrastructure and programs for the people and helping your people. And both sides would be working to make sure that you remain neutral. But I mean, this is my view, and I don't see a downside for anyone. I think the problem is, and some people may beat me up over this who disagree. Mostly people on the left, but I believe that NATO and the West and the United States, they do want to control that country for a variety of reasons, from some of them being corrupt reasons and other ones being political and geopolitical and military, for military reasons. But they want to control the country. So we've been down this road just about every night, and I keep repeating myself over and over again. We see the demands coming from the Russians, which is basically they want to denazify Ukraine. They want it disarmed so that they're not a military threat to Russia because they're right on their doorstep, and they want Ukraine to remain a neutral country, so it's a buffer between them and NATO. And NATO has been expanding over the past decade or so. They've added 13 countries, and now they're pushed right up against Russia's doorstep, and that's really the main issue. And then there are internal domestic issues within Ukraine that have created a divided country with Zelensky bombing Russian-speaking Ukrainians in areas that have declared that they want to be independent. And the Russians have said that they would protect them. So there's a sort of civil war going on there. And thousands of people died before the Russians ever invaded because Zelensky's been bombing those people in those two zones. And he's been doing it for a long time. But the media doesn't really talk about that. There's a lot the media doesn't talk about. A whole lot. And I'm sorry if you don't want to hear it. I think most of our viewers are aware. But if you're tuning in and you're listening to this for the first time, you don't want to hear what I'm saying, because I'm sorry, I'm just not buying what the media in Canada and the U.S. is feeding us right now.
Yeah,
it's
and I mean,
propaganda.
Definitely, there's a lot of brainwashing happening there, and
on both sides. Yeah,
on both sides, big time. Propaganda goes both ways, right? So they're both using it to a heavy degree. What'll happen next, I don't know. I think that we're looking at more factors of instability across the world, and it's really unfortunate, especially after coming out of COVID. But I mean, we've talked about that too before, where this almost seems like it's by design, all this instability that we keep getting.
Yeah. So we'll see where all this goes. Yeah, I don't think it's looking that great. I think it's gonna drag out for some time. The United States sending in those drones, that's going to prolong things again. But I'll tell you this, and I think we've seen some of this in the past week. The Russians will ramp up, continue to hit harder and harder. And that's because they keep trying to give them an opportunity to basically surrender, and they're not doing that. And so their solution will be to destroy as much of the country as they need to in order to achieve their objective. And I don't think they really want to occupy the country. They want to live alongside Ukraine, I think, but they don't want to occupy it. I think that Putin understands that would be a very costly thing to do, because especially in the Ukrainian speaking areas and the in the areas where he doesn't have as much public support, he would need to keep a lot of troops in there to keep control of the country, and it would turn into a long-term mess. But I mean, that's his problem. He's the guy who's got to deal with that. So we'll see. I just don't know. And again, Scott Ritter, he understands this situation much better than I do. That's why he's the expert, and that's why we've asked him to join us tonight, and he has graciously agreed to do that. So, he may even set me straight on a few things.
Because, and myself, I'm entirely open to any education on this whatsoever. Like, that's fine. I want to learn as much as possible. And a subject like this, I think you could probably spend a lifetime or years learning and a lifetime mastering with a subject that goes this deep. It's not something that's just happened yesterday. This is something that built up over years and years and years.
Yeah, Arnie said it was impossible for Jewish leaders to support Nazis, Wonky Man says. Yeah, well, you know what? George Soros is Jewish, and he was, as a teenager, went around with a Nazi who protected him as long as George Soros pointed out people that needed to be rounded up. And we can find you the clip of that. We might do that later tonight. People don't understand what fascism really is. They don't really understand the roots because we haven't been taught in school adequately about it. And they think it's a far right thing, and it really isn't. Even before World War II, it was generally agreed that fascism was on the left and that it was akin to socialism and communism. It was in that same camp. It was only after World War II that the people on the left decided to kind of push it over to the right of the political spectrum. And that was when all the horrific images of concentration camps came out, and then a big media push happened, and people were sort of told a little bit different story. But the truth is, the Nazis in Germany and fascists in general, not in general, fascists are socialists. It's a different kind of socialism. It's based on state control of large corporations and the economy. That's at the core of it. And also it's based on censorship. And one of the tactics they use is to demonize people and use them as a scapegoat. And that's what they did with the Jews. And they've done it in different ways in different countries, different fascist leaders. But that's really it in a nutshell. We can talk a lot more about it, and we will. I don't know if we'll get that deep into it tonight, but we certainly can in a future episode. And yeah, fascism, socialism, communism, they're all kind of over there together. And people who are embracing freedom, you want to put us on the right. I guess it depends on how you want to draw your political spectrum, but there's really nothing in common between a freedom fighter and a fascist. I guarantee you that.
No, there really isn't. It's the left will always the socialist left will always imply that the government needs to take care of people and assume that people are incapable of taking care of themselves.
Yeah. And before we get too deep into all of this other stuff, let's just check in with this Freedom Convoy stuff. Let's listen into a little bit to the speech that they always have, like speeches before they head out on the highway. And then we're going to show you what happened down there in D.C. today with the People's Convoy, as 4 of those trucks did make their way around the police barricades. And I'm not sure how they did that, but we'll show you kind of what went on. So hang on a second here. Let me cue up the speech from the People's Convoy this morning, just so you can get a sense of where they were at before they went out on the highway.
That we were going to take if we got blocked, and we literally crumble up that paper and throw it away and keep working on the next route. We had to do that because we legitimately thought somebody would try to shut us down on the way across from Adelanto, California to here. Try doing that while trucking. Worked all right for him because he just trucked across the country waiting for us to tell him what exit to grab. So there's some clarification before Mike starts talking his smack. Now I'm out of here. Love you all. God bless. Oh, you're cranky. Go home and take a nap. That's my role. That's what I do best. But they did. He's right. That bus was a mess, and they worked their butts off the whole way across. I was in contact with them the whole way. So. Let him have a few moments on the mic too. Oh, okay. Right on. Well, don't come up here. I don't really have much for you. I know Brian filled you in. He's going to be taking a little bit of R&R time, which, someday he said some of it, but when this is over and the whole story of how this all came together and what we've gone through and the amount of people that are against us that tried to screw this convoy up coming across that have been arrested and stuff like that will come out, and I think everybody will understand the importance behind, the fact that we have this bus that seems to be a thorn in some people's sides and everything else, but how pivotal it was in making this whole thing happen. So when this is over, there'll be a good story somewhere. I'm sure there'll be a movie somewhere. That'd be interesting. But Convoy 2. The sequel 50 years later. Hopefully it doesn't turn into Duel.
White line fever. You gonna jump your cab over?
Yeah, a little white line fever into the Capitol or something. There you go.
Cab over.
That's right. No, so we're gonna keep doing our thing here while he takes some time, and it's much needed, and I'm probably gonna end up having to do that at some point too. Just because it's been since like the 1st of February since I've seen my kids because of all this. So it happens, and we're all dealing with that out here. So I don't think that we're just up here whining. I know everybody's here spending time away, like I said the other day, from work or family or home or whatever, and we're living like nomads, which is actually kind of refreshing, to be perfectly honest, in certain ways. So today we're going to run the convoy again. I just got back. It's foggy here, but as soon as we get out down near 70, it's completely clear, so we'll be perfectly okay. The roads are nice and dry, and we're gonna run down in here and see if there's still. I know yesterday it sounded like everyone got a couple escorts through town to see everything, which is pretty cool. I actually got phone calls from CNN and them type of people wanting to know if we were being escorted through DC, and I was like, well, is that what it looks like? They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, there's your answer. Yeah, here's your sign. So we'll see what they have in store for us today. We're going to go down and probably run the same route up 395 through town and see if they pull their dump trucks out and pretend like they got balls of steel, which we know they don't. So, once again, though, if you get into talks with the officers, they're doing what they're supposed to do. However, I hope that they understand that at some point they're doing something that's actually illegal. And just like the whole Nuremberg trials, they're going to end up being the ones that end up getting in trouble for it, even though they're following orders. That's right. They forget that they also took an oath to protect certain things. So, just keep that in mind. Don't get in confrontations with them or yell at them or whatever. We're going to go down and we're just going to keep annoying them and exhausting their resources and playing with them, because we got nothing but time sitting here doing what we're doing. That's why we're here, right? So we're going to leave this morning. I don't know, it's probably close to 10 o'clock already and we're still here. So probably it might be a couple minutes after that here till we get going this morning. But same thing, we're going to send a couple trucks out and send the cars in behind us and go on a little ride again down through downtown DC and see what a Friday afternoon in the swamp looks like. Yeah, it's actually, I just came around 495 from my friend's house this morning and it's already a mess. So I hope everybody likes playing in traffic today. Other than that, I don't really have much. We'll be back here tonight, and I guess the ball's in my court for a couple of days. So other than that, we're good here.
So that's basically what was going on there this morning. It gives you a sense of kind of where they started, but things kind of took a little bit of a different turn today because they were just, driving around the Beltway, right? But that's not the way things ended up today. Instead, what we had going on was, as I said, 4 trucks made their way through or around police barricades. And we have this report from One American News, and it really sums things up. So I thought we might just run that for you. Let me cue up the One American News report, and we'll let them explain kind of what happened. We've also got some raw footage that I think we can share with you as well. But here's the One American News
3
report.
weeks since the People's Convoy left California, and some drivers now feel like they found an ending to their journey. One America's Stefan Kleinhans has more from Washington.
While the People's Convoy is not officially over, some of the drivers have found a sense of resolution. After days of barricades from the D.C. Metropolitan Police, 4 of the drivers found their way into the nation's capital to make their peaceful statement and to have their voices heard.
My boss is going to eventually tell me to start arresting people.
Who's your boss?
I don't want to do
On what grounds?
You are impeding a highway. Your vehicle stopped right here. You're failing to obey a lawful order.
What's the lawful order?
To remove your vehicles from the roadway through 295 northbound.
On what grounds, sir? What legal grounds?
That is the open roadway right now.
The D.C. Metropolitan Police Department blocked exits into the Capitol for 3 days to prevent peaceful truckers from entering the city. About 15 trucks stopped at one of the exits to ask the police why they were blocking them.
So here's the. So you got to move the trucks. You got to keep going north on 295, just like yesterday.
Why?
Because right now
We want to go into town and exercise our First Amendment rights under the Constitution of the United States.
Hold on a second, Alan. So you can go into the city and exercise your constitutional right. However, right now you can't drive the trucks this way.
Alan Kelly, a trucker who had been with the convoy from the beginning and led the small group of truckers toward D.C., was not afraid to confront the officers.
I know you don't.
We're not open.
But you guys are doing what you're told to do by a bunch of tyrants.
The
For
problem.
a paycheck is over your freedom? Really?
I got you.
What about our kids?
Listen
What about your kids and your
Listen
kids
for
and
a
your
second.
grandkids?
The officers threatened to arrest the truckers for allegedly blocking the highway, saying they were in violation for parking on the highway, despite the exit being barricaded by D.C. Metropolitan Police.
So yeah, we have a portion of the highway blocked.
Okay.
The trucks that are behind me are now in violation because they are parked on a highway and we're ordering them to move.
The truckers said they support law enforcement and were very kind to the officers, saying they were surprised they were being treated this way after the trucker community always supported them.
We love you guys. Them guys are the ones that throw you guys under the bus. We've supported you for years.
Beginning, we've always
I
supported
appreciate
you.
that.
We have.
So if you could help us, if you could keep moving.
Could you help us?
295.
And help us and work
No
for the
one's
people?
helping us.
Come in with all your four-wheelers, you can come in with your RVs,
We had no,
you
we
can
had
come
no
in with
issues.
everything else.
While the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department shows no signs of stopping the rolling barricades as the convoy drives through, a U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit ruled back in 2009 that similar usage of roadblocks by the D.C. police were unconstitutional. In the summer of 2008, D.C. police set up these roadblock checkpoints in response to shootings in the city. Chief Judge David Sentel wrote, "It cannot be gainsaid that citizens have a right to drive upon the public streets of the District of Columbia or any other city absent a constitutionally sound reason for limiting their access." He went on to say, "It is apparent that appellants' constitutional rights are violated." Despite the continued efforts of local law enforcement to prevent peaceful truckers from entering the city, 4 trucks found a way into the Capitol late in the day on Wednesday. They drove through the district to make a peaceful statement, and when law enforcement caught wind of the truckers, they tailed them, but they did not pull them over. Law enforcement asked the truckers what their intentions were, and they said it was to sightsee and drive around for a couple hours. Some Metropolitan Police officers were called back to work while the 4 trucks were in the city, but told the truckers they were legally allowed to drive through the city, but could not park the trucks because there was no commercial vehicle parking in the district. It seemed that law enforcement efforts to barricade the city failed, and the 4 trucks that made into the city were legally allowed to be there and proved they were peaceful protesters. So the question remains, why Metropolitan Police have blocked the trucks from entering the city? Stefan Kleinhans, One American News, Washington.
Want to see more videos?
So you see that there was a little bit of a change there. Obviously, the truckers are not done, not by a long shot. And every day they test the I guess the measures that are being employed by the authorities to kind of see what their tactics are, what they're doing, and then trying to figure out what they can do on the other side to make their presence known and get a little bit of leverage in there so that the politicians have to listen to what they have to say about these medical mandates. And what do you think, Brendan? Are they having any impact?
Well, they're definitely irritating more bureaucrats, which it's starting to become apparent with how they're being reported on in other outlets. Not so much this outlet, because this outlet seemed to be pretty good at pointing out, like, they have a constitutional right that they can enter the city and all that other stuff. It's totally okay for them to do that, but just like if you look at Washington Post or many other news outlets, it is all stuff that just seems like it's out of a psyop or something like that. So the more it irritates these bureaucrats, the more notoriety they're going to get, because right now I don't think it's affecting too many people in Washington at this point, just people en route. And I mean, if they're getting on the Beltway at 10 a.m., how effective is that, right? Because people aren't really driving to work at 10 a.m. usually. But it's going to remain to be seen, I think. It depends on how long that they're willing to do this. So whenever they're interested in enacting their Plan B, that'll be interesting to see.
Well, I think that their tactics have been, in some ways, kind of smart, because they've gone in soft and they're just making sure that they obey every law. Even when those 4 trucks went down into D.C., they didn't do a thing that was illegal. They just drove around on the streets. And even when they were tailed by police, they weren't pulled over because they were doing nothing wrong, nothing illegal. I don't know how they got down there, given that these blockades were set up, but whatever they did, it was obviously lawful, and the cops didn't bother them in the end. And by sending cars down there yesterday, that was another way to sort of check things out, make their presence known, test the reaction from police, and see how they're going to respond if they try to send more trucks down there. And we're already seeing that there are some questions being raised about the constitutionality of blocking these exits and blocking the roads. And it's interesting because in Canada, of course, our laws are different. And we've seen the same kinds of tactics being used by law enforcement in the Ottawa area and in other cities as well, in Windsor and outside the Ambassador Bridge, where they've set up barricades to make it impossible for trucks to get parked on Huron Church Road, which leads up to the Ambassador Bridge. But we've seen these tactics used in Canada. But because the laws are different here, I think the police have a lot more latitude to do that. But in the States, if they continue to do it, in Washington, D.C., there could be legal challenges to that, because they're preventing the truckers from going where they are constitutionally allowed to go. They're violating their rights under the Constitution. So that's kind of an interesting twist and an interesting difference between what's going on there and what happened in Canada.
That's some really good points you made there, and it's probably going to be better for them in the long run. But either way, Washington, D.C. is still going to have disdain for these guys no matter what they do. It's an eventuality, not.
I don't know. Like, I don't even know if the people in Ottawa, it depends on who you talk to down there, right? I think there are a lot of people who probably supported the truckers in Ottawa, and then there are some people that are on the other side of the political fence who were annoyed. No question about that, because they have a different political viewpoint. But my guess is that if you were to take a poll, the response would just be divided down political lines. Now in Washington D.C., I think it's a pretty left wing
Yeah, it's
place.
very left
So
wing. Very left wing.
who knows? But disdain, maybe by some, but not by all. And I think a lot of people there probably realize the truckers they're fighting for everyone's rights, not just looking out for their own interests, and they're putting it on the line. I think a lot of people understand that.
Yeah,
So-
for sure. This isn't something that they did lightly at all. I don't think, and that's why it's very good to watch this unfold.
Yeah, and look, this is not. They knew this was going to be a long, drawn-out process,
Yeah.
and they have had some successes already. I'm impressed by that. They did get meetings with some senators, including Ted Cruz, and I mean, I haven't seen. Okay, Mo, just be patient. The two Myrons. We'll keep talking until Scott shows up. Patience, my friend, patience. The process in DC is going to be drawn out, and I think that their tactics are sound. I don't think the truckers went in there to disrupt traffic on the Beltway. That wasn't their intention. They went down there to make their presence known. More than that, it's sort of like reconnaissance, and it's testing. If we do this, what do the cops do? If we do this, what do the politicians do? Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's push this button. I think they're being methodical about it and smart, and they're trying to do it in a way that they don't have people arrested and thrown in jail. And I think that's probably a good thing. So I think we have to continue to give them the benefit of the doubt. And each day we've seen slightly different things happening, and we've seen some results. So let's just see how it plays out.
And their spirits are pretty high too, which is a good testament to their character. That's something that needs to be held up in order for this to have a longevity, I think. So that's good news.
The one thing that they do need is more attention, more media attention. You don't get a lot of media attention when things are bland, right? You get media attention when there's controversy or action of some kind. And I think people are, right now it's just been kind of low key because they just keep probing and trying a little of this, trying a little of that.
Yeah, I know. Even looking them up on DuckDuckGo, it doesn't provide like a lot of coverage for it.
Yeah, and the truckers did get a meeting with Jim Jordan as well, so that's another positive thing. So, there's a lot going on. I just, I've seen, but so far the politicians, as far as I know, they've all been on the conservative side, Republicans. So they need to cross party lines in order to get something done, I think. And that's going to be the really tough thing.
I think that was one of the bigger failures in Canada, was the trucker movement was not able to cross party line. We had some result with member of Parliament Jordan Lightbound, who is a Liberal individual who ultimately sided with the Conservatives to put forward a motion in Canada House of Commons to get a roadmap going to end pandemic measures. And other than that, though, we haven't heard from him since. But that's the first time that's kind of happened with Justin Trudeau, other than a couple of his other little slip-ups that he had. But I think think the Liberal Party in Canada is pretty stuck to Justin Trudeau and doing what they want, if that's the only result that the Canadian truckers got out of it.
Yeah, so at this point, before we get into the next thing here, if you can support our work, please do so by donating at freedomreporters.com. That's freedomreporters.com. And there are hot links in the YouTube and Facebook descriptions, and it helps us continue these broadcasts, and it helps us continue to bring in great guests like Scott Ritter, who's coming up shortly to discuss the situation in Ukraine. Scott is a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. He also was a UN weapons inspector. He worked alongside General Schwarzkopf during the Iraq and Kuwait situations.
Desert Storm, is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
So he has a lot. He was in the military for over 20 years, and he has a lot of valuable insight that he'll be sharing with us. He knows a lot about the situation in Ukraine, and that's why we've got him coming on, because he's the man when it comes to this stuff. So he'll be here shortly. Again, donate at freedomreporters.com if you can. If not, please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you've already subscribed to the YouTube channel, please go over to Rumble. We are live over there again tonight, and our channel seems to be pretty stable now. So please subscribe to our Rumble channel under Maverick News, and that will help us out a lot as well, because we're trying to migrate everybody over to Rumble, and we'll get some other video platforms going as well. We can't rely on YouTube or Facebook because they are censorship platforms, and we need to be able to speak as freely as possible. It's probably only a matter of time before they kick us right off here. So
yeah,
go to
YouTube,
Rumble and watch us over there.
Big Tech does not like what we have to say, but this is all in the pursuit of truth, and so that's what we're most interested in, and is talking about the truth.
And speaking of truth, we've been telling you that there are actual Nazi groups in Ukraine, and that is the truth. Even though Arnold Schwarzenegger yesterday with his video said that, oh, it's not true, there are no Nazis in Ukraine, nothing to see there. I will tell you the truth. I'm Arnold. You can trust me. I don't do a very good Arnold, but there is so much propaganda going on that on both sides, it's hard to know what the truth is. However, I did find this just to illustrate that even the mainstream media, which is telling us, or I guess they're not telling us, is the point. They're ignoring the fact that there are actual Nazis there, but it's more than that. The Azov Battalion, which was originally a civilian paramilitary militia, they're now part of the actual Ukrainian military. And they have training camps for kids, sort of like their own version, I guess, of the Hitler Youth. Anyway, I have for you a documentary from NBC. Now, this is an arm of NBC that allows filmmakers to contribute to this online platform that NBC has. And this is part of a documentary from a few years ago, I think 2017. I could be wrong. Let me just check that. Yeah, 2017. And I just want to play a little bit of this for you because it's chilling. And just watch this, because this is a mainstream media platform. This was before all of this unfolded. 2017. This speaks for itself.
Рій, наше гасло. України, діти, ми. Нехай Москва лежить в руїнах, а нам на це начхати. Смерть, смерть москалям! Смерть, смерть москалям!
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Hi, Spike. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
So I'm looking through the documentary you shot for us in Ukraine. Basically, I just wanted to ask if you could take me through a few things. We're looking at these kids at camp, right? Like singing around a campfire.
This is a summer camp for children run by a military battalion on the outskirts of Kiev. Summer camps in Ukraine are common, but this one is much more extreme. The kids spend a week on the camp. They learn patriotic songs, they receive firearms combat training, and they participate in combat reconstructions. The children that you're seeing in this edit, half of them have a direct relationship to a battalion called Azov.
So who is Azov?
Azov are a controversial Ukrainian battalion. After Crimea's annexation, the official Ukrainian military didn't have enough soldiers to fight. So civilians formed many of their own volunteer battalions, one of which was Azov. Soon after, in November 2014, Azov were brought into the official National Guard. So now they're a legitimate battalion.
В дитинстві взагалі немає уявлення, що таке війна, мабуть, і не задумуєшся. Це зараз. То дітям треба казати, що в нас війна, щоб вони розуміли.
Моє рішення. Я цілий рік хотів цей табір. І мої мрії здійснилися.
He's incredible, Smolny. His memory of patriotic literature and poems was incredible. The kids live in tents, and sometimes they're woken up at 3 a.m. by fireworks or like smoke grenades, you know, and they have to get out of their tents and simulate combat. But if you ask any of them, they enjoy it.
These guys saw action, right? Who were they actually fighting against in that like archive footage?
They are fighting Russian sympathizers. It's not Russian army, it's Russian rebels, I suppose, or perhaps even Ukrainian-born Russian sympathizers.
Я не лівих взглядів, я не комуніст. Я не нацист, не фашист. Я націоналіст своєї країни.
Wanted to pick up on the nationalism thing. What do they identify as being a nationalist of Ukraine?
Number one is not to be Russian, because for the last 100 years, Russia have been oppressing and pushing at their borders. And number two is to hold on to whatever Ukrainian identity they did have and still do have. So they're sitting between Russia and Russia's ideologies, but also not wanting to join a liberalizing Western Europe.
Те ж саме ми хочемо привити до дітей, щоб вони любили Україну, щоб вони її не споплюжували. Покоління, яке зараз в нашій країні, воно повинно забезпечити фундамент для іншого покоління.
Быстрее, быстрее, быстрее!
And did you get a sense that people like approve or don't approve of these camps?
The idea of the Azov camp specifically is less popular depending on who you speak to. The Ukrainian public offer them some gratitude for the work that they did in 2014 in terms of saving part of the east of Ukraine. But their ideologies are radical for the rest of Ukraine. They don't like immigration, they don't like foreigners.
К сожалению, мы находимся в состоянии необъявленной войны. Мы не учим своих детей отнимать жизнь. Мы учим их культуре общения с оружием.
The fear that they're feeling, does that link to nationalism somehow?
Historically, how their nationalism relates to fear. It's fear of their language being squashed by Russia. It's fear of their land being taken away by Russia.
Is there an argument to be made that these camps kind of are stoking the fear or providing a solution?
I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it? If the children didn't go to these camps, the children wouldn't have such a deep idea of Ukraine-Russian history. But then I guess if the war came closer, would they be hindered by that? I don't know. I'm sure the camps do propagate the fear, but whether or not it's necessary, I really don't know either.
Страх – це зло. Страх – це чорна смісь, яка доводить людей до сказу.
I think we've got everything, Spike.
Okay, good luck.
Speak to you soon.
Bye.
What are your kids doing this summer?
Not that. Did you send your kids to Camp Nazi too?
Well, I just think that the situation is. It's unfortunate that kids have to be there.
Yes, absolutely. And
that documentary, tell me there are no Nazis in Ukraine. Tell me, because that's a lie. There are Nazi groups in Ukraine. It's a well-known, established fact. That's the truth. So Arnold can sit there and deny it if he wants to, and they can put all kinds of money behind his video, and a lot of people here will believe it because we in Canada and the United States, a lot of people, unless you've been overseas, unless you've served in the military, a lot of people are insulated from reality, the international reality, and are not aware of the reality in places like Ukraine. People don't know. And there is still a lot of innocence in North America because of the insulation that has shielded us all this time from the kinds of conflicts that they've had in on the Eurasian in the Eurasian countries. We better wake up because it's all coming here. It's all coming here now because the world is a much smaller place. And we are being used, and I said this the other night, Brendan, that we are at war with Russia. Our governments have declared an economic war against Russia already. We're sending weapons over there. We are at war.
Yes.
It's not.
Not
we're not fully engaged kinetically, but we are being used as combatants. We have become essentially economic cannon fodder. That's what we are. And this is only just beginning, I think. And I hope that people here wise up, because I don't want people here to have to send their kids to camps like that in the summer or have people feel like they should. I don't want all that stuff here. And I don't want it over there. That's terrible. These kids are losing their innocence there, if they ever had any. Right? They had a period of peace here, and they said they had to explain war to those kids. That was in 2017. Now war's there again. And that country has been the focal point of many battles, many wars over hundreds and thousands of years. It's always been a battleground, and
big time.
My heart goes out to those kids.
That's just it. And we're going to send Canadians over there, or we have Canadians who have independently gone there. And they're going to come back with dealing with that stuff.
But look, people here need to know. Mm-hmm. It does not serve the people here or there properly or well to have our media lying to us, telling us that there are no Nazis. I saw stories today from on Yahoo News saying that, and the headline was that the Russian demands for a peaceful resolution were offensive because they suggested, because they're calling for the denazification of Ukraine, as though, and then said that because Zelensky is Jewish, it just proves there are no Nazis there. Well, it's just not true.
Of course.
I find the lies offensive.
It is offensive. It is. They assume that we're stupid and that we don't pay attention. While we're on this topic, I do have this article from The Hill, and I still don't know how I feel about this, at least intellectually, and maybe we could talk about that. But where did the media decide that Ukraine had neo-Nazis and then out of nowhere decide that it's acceptable to have neo-Nazis? So it says Congress bans arms to Ukraine militia linked to neo-Nazis. And the date on this article, if you take a look, is March 27 of 2018. It says a little notice provision in the 2,232-page government spending bill passed last week bans U.S. arms from going to a controversial ultra-nationalist militia in Ukraine that has openly accepted neo-Nazis into its ranks. The House passed a spending bill for the past 3 years, have included a ban on U.S. aid to Ukraine from going to the Azov Battalion. But the provision was stripped out before the final passage each year. So it looks like they haven't been successful with it, even back then. But it says white supremacy and neo-Nazism are unacceptable and have no place in our world. Representative Ro Khanna of California, an outspoken critic of providing lethal aid to Ukraine, said in a statement to The Hill on Tuesday, I am very pleased that the recently passed omnibus prevents the U.S. from providing arms and training assistance to neo-Nazi Azov Battalion. So, again, here is a clear consistency with Democrats requesting to stay out of war, but we have one here who is totally in favor of the war. But when did the media decide that it was going to be acceptable to have? When did the media decide that neo-Nazism was okay and it should be ignored? Is it that they're claiming that the war in Ukraine justifies the means, or like, what's the answer here? Where's the ethical line that we've seemed to have crossed without asking anyone's permission?
Well, the problem is that here, Nazis are what they say Nazis are. And when you ask a leftist or anyone on that side of the political spectrum what a Nazi is, they really don't have a good definition. They never do. It's always like, well, Donald Trump is a Nazi. He's a fascist because he's a totalitarian. And what do you mean he's a totalitarian? Well, he says mean things on Twitter. They really don't have a good definition, if a definition at all. So what we have ended up with here is sort of this fake fascism, where they just use it as a go-to smear every time they have somebody that they disagree with, or if it's somebody they don't like. They just call them a Nazi, just the same way they call people a racist. It's just instantly that's where they go, because they rarely ever have a good argument. They just throw these insults out. Well, you're a racist Nazi. And the more they hate you, the more the pejorative terms fly. They'll combine them and wrap them up. It's all about insults. That's all it is. So when you have real Nazis, they excuse it, because the truth is these people on the left are aligned with them. That's what we're dealing with here. That's what we've seen in Canada with our own Liberal government. The measures that they're taking, that Trudeau took during the truckers' protest, the invocation of the Emergencies Act, the War Measures Act, which is essentially imposing martial law because you had some truckers down there engaged in what was really a lawful protest. Now they just turn the laws, twist the laws, make new laws up. The way they throw their political opponents in jail, and then people on the other side get a pass all the time. It's the same kind of tactics that the Nazis in Germany used.
Yes. And as we'd seen yesterday in that clip I played yesterday, they're using political intimidation tactics just as the Nazis had used them, where they had lined them all up in a municipal town hall and were basically physically inflicting their will on council members. And yeah, that's true, Peter McCarby. Sorry. But yeah, Facebook supports Nazis now. It's like, oh, and it's okay to hate these people as well. So we can all do that now. It's acceptable.
Yes, apparently. And Vladimir Putin did address a huge crowd. This has turned into an information war as much as anything else, which is to be expected today, given the current state of our technology. And this was Putin's speech at a sporting event.
Российской Федерации Владимир Владимирович Путин. Мы, многонациональный народ Российской Федерации, объединенные общей судьбой, на своей земле. Это первые строчки основного закона России, Конституции. И каждое слово наполнено глубоким смыслом, имеет огромное значение. На своей земле, объединенные общей судьбой. Так наверняка думали, и этим руководствовались люди, когда шли на референдум в Крыму и Севастополе 18 марта 2014 года. Они жили и живут на своей земле и хотели жить общей судьбой со своей исторической родиной, с Россией. Они имели на это полное право и достигли своей цели. Поздравим прежде всего их с праздником. Это их праздник. Поздравляем! Именно избавить людей от этих страданий, от этого геноцида является основной, главной причиной, побудительным мотивом и целью военной операции, которую мы начали на Донбассе и на Украине. Именно в этом цель. И здесь, вы знаете, мне приходят в голову слова из Священного Писания. Нет больше любви, как если бы кто-то отдал душу свою за друзей своих.
And things paused there. And joining us live now is Scott Ritter. Hello, Scott. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. How are you?
Just fine. We really appreciate you joining us this evening. Oops. You're back. It's a privilege to have you here tonight. I know that you have a lot of experience, and it's great to have what I consider to be a real expert joining us, because these are complicated issues surrounding this whole situation in Ukraine. First of all, can we just get some background on you? I know that you were with the U.S. Marine Corps as an intelligence officer. You were a UN weapons inspector. Can you just give us a little bit more detail?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I was a Air Force brat. So my father was career Air Force, which means I was raised all over the world. I went to 3 high schools, one in Hawaii, one in Turkey, and I graduated from a German high school. And the reason why I bring that up is to highlight the Cold War aspect of the times I grew up in. I graduated high school in 1979 in Germany which was the front line of the Cold War. I mean, literally right across the border was the First Guards Tank Army, the same one that's in Ukraine today, along with the 20th Combined Arms Army, two elite strike formations that on a moment's notice could come across the border, and my house was 60 kilometers away from the front line. And that's the environment I grew up in. So when I went to college, I studied Russian history, the focus on Russian military history. And when I graduated, I was commissioned in the Marine Corps for the sole purpose of joining the military to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower maneuver, and the enemy, of course, being the Soviet Army. I spent 2.5 years in the deserts of 29 Palms perfecting that skill. I was with first with a brigade headquarters, and I was with an artillery unit. And artillery plays a very big role in modern warfare, and we learned to shoot, move, and communicate with the best of them. I got orders after that. I was supposed to join what's called a Marine Amphibious Unit back then. Today, I think it's called a Marine Expeditionary Unit, but it's basically a reinforced battalion that's on amphibious shipping floating around the world ready to respond at a moment's notice, literally the tip of the spear. Best orders you could hope for. And they were canceled because Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And in February 1988, I was literally the first person assigned to this new Department of Defense agency called the On-Site Inspection Agency, which was organized to implement the INF Treaty. And in June of 1988, I was the first U.S. inspector on the soil of the Soviet Union to begin the inspection part of the INF Treaty. And I did that for 2 years, 2.5 years. And one of the best jobs I could ever have. I mean, I went from trying to kill these guys to working with them cooperatively to rid the world of 2 classes of very dangerous nuclear weapons. And this began a process of arms control, et cetera. When that job ended in July of 1990, I headed off to the captain's level course in the Marine Corps right about the time that Saddam Hussein decided he was going to invade Kuwait. And then that became my focus. And in January of 1990, I was dispatched to Norman Schwarzkopf's headquarters in Riyadh to participate in Operation Desert Storm. Because of my so-called missile expertise, I was given the Scud portfolio, and I spent a lot of time involved in Scud hunting with the Air Force, with special operations units and such. And then the war ended, and I left the Marine Corps and immediately was asked by the United Nations to come and complete the job that the war didn't complete, to get rid of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. I was brought in to create something the United Nations had never had before, which is an independent intelligence capability. So I built an intelligence unit from the ground up. And we became the premier intelligence entity in the world when it came to Iraq's weapon mass destruction. We liaised with everybody from the CIA to British military intelligence to the Mossad to Israeli intelligence, German intelligence, Russian intelligence. The bottom line is any nation, including the Iranians, who had intelligence on Iran's weapons of mass destruction, we dealt with. And I spent 7 years doing that job. I resigned because the U.S. was interfering with our work, trying to use the inspections for purposes that weren't consistent with the mandate of disarmament. They were trying to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And I think I gained a little bit of notoriety right before the invasion of Iraq by speaking out, challenging the Bush administration's assertions that it knew that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction programs. And I said, well, if you know that, please tell me, because for 7 years we were looking for them. and they weren't, I mean, we got rid of them, we disarmed them, and what we thought was missing wasn't there. So, and it turns out I was right. But unfortunately, being right after the fact doesn't help the issue. Since then, I've been focused on energy security, issues pertaining to disarmament, and I've continued my lifelong study of the Russian military. And so I'm pretty up to speed on all things Russian military, which is why I feel comfortable talking about Ukraine. I don't normally go on programs like this and talk about things that I don't have a comfort level. I'm not going to call myself an expert. but I am going to say that when I do speak about a subject, it's usually it tends to be fact-based, and if I'm making any I'm doing any speculation, it's informed speculation, and if I don't know, I'll say I don't know.
Okay. And from what I've heard you say elsewhere, I think that your perspective is a little different than what we're getting from the mainstream media, which I think is, in a time like this, there's a lot of cheerleading that goes on both sides, right? Because they're trying to create national unity around a cause, which is war. But we're seeking, I think, a more informed and nuanced and truthful perspective. So I guess my first question is, where the heck are we at with this? We keep hearing that, oh, the Russians are being pushed back, they're being delayed, but it seems to me they're probably about on course and on schedule.
You know, on June 6, 1944, the United States and Great Britain and the Canadians and the French and the Dutch and whoever else was part of Operation Overlord crossed the English Channel and launched one of the largest amphibious operations in history to begin the liberation of France. And from that moment on, we won virtually every battle. We dominated the scene operationally. But if we had isolated the battlefield, for instance, on outside of Caen sometime in July, we would have seen the Germans launch a vicious counterattack that destroyed dozens of Canadian and British tanks. Outside during the Battle of the Falaise Gap, with the Great Encirclement, the Germans launched a counterattack that took out an American regiment. And the point I'm trying to make is, war is a bloody, vicious thing. And when you fight a competent militaries tend to perform competently. And what I mean by that is, if you give them the opportunity to beat you up, they're going to beat you up. No one should ever think for a second that the Ukrainian military is not one of the most competent militaries in the world today. I mean, they've been, since 2015, they've been on the receiving end of billions of dollars of NATO training and equipment. This isn't, your old Soviet-style conscript military. This is a military that is trained to NATO standards, meaning that a Ukrainian battalion that has been trained by NATO is interoperable with NATO. You can literally plug out a German battalion, plug in a Ukrainian battalion, and they should be able to operate with everybody else. These are highly skilled people, well-equipped, well-led, and well-motivated. They're a formidable force, and there's a lot of them. There's 260,000 regular forces. There's another 310,000 reserves, plus then you have the intelligence forces, the border guards, and other security forces. You're looking around 600,000 well-armed, well-led, highly motivated, competent Ukrainian defenders. Now, in war, this is just standard military math. The people going on the offense want to have a 3-to-1 advantage at least. You'd like to have 4, you'd like to have 5, but at a minimum, you don't even consider initiating offensive operations unless you have a 3-to-1 advantage. Now, if you're going up against 600,000 Ukrainians, that means you need 1,800,000 men before you could even think about beginning offensive operations. The Russians are coming in with around 200,000. Basically, they flipped the grid on this one. They're coming in with a 3-to-1 disadvantage, which no sane person would ever recommend when it comes to offensive operations. Because most of the time when we're thinking offensive operations, we're thinking about the conquering of territory, the seizing of ground. But Russia made it clear from the beginning, they are not there to occupy Ukraine. They're there to accomplish 2 things. One, denazification. That means they're going to hunt down and they're going to destroy every Azov or Azov-like unit in the Ukrainian military. There will be no mercy shown, and no mercy is being shown. 2 is the demilitarization. What they mean by that is, because Ukraine opted to become a proxy of NATO, even though they're not a NATO member, their military behaves as if it is a NATO member. It acts as if it's a NATO member. It trains with NATO. It deploys with NATO. So it's everything but being stamped, we are NATO. Russia will not allow this situation to exist. So it's going to demilitarize. It gave the Ukrainians an opportunity. Stay in your barracks. We're going to come in and we're going to dismantle this NATO machinery. And we're not going to kill anybody. We don't want to kill anybody. We just want to get rid of this NATO machinery so that whatever emerges after this is not going to be a NATO proxy. And these two military objectives were attached to a political objective, which is Ukrainian neutrality, that Ukraine can never be a member of NATO. So this is the military operation that Russia is doing. So its goal isn't to capture Kiev. Its goal isn't to capture Kharkov. Its goal isn't to capture Odessa. Its goal is to destroy the Ukrainian military and in the process destroy these neo-Nazi affiliated military organizations that were absorbed by the military. And it's doing just that. In the East, you have the militias, which are basically Russian military proxies. They're equipped by Russians. They probably have a lot of Russian officers and NCOs mixed in there, and they're trained to Russian standards. Their job in military terms is to fix the enemy. That means that I've got 120,000 of Ukraine's best forces in the East. And one of the reasons you have to ask yourself, why did the Ukrainians put so many people that far east? The Russians claim because they were getting ready to launch an offensive operation of their own. I don't know. I haven't seen the Russian paperwork. And as we all know in war, truth is the first casualty. So I'm not going to believe anything until I see it. What I do know is that the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Militia reached out and grabbed onto the Ukrainians, and they're not letting go. And they shake them, they fight. There's casualties on both sides. But when the Ukrainians try to withdraw, they reach out and they grab them again. And they're fixing them in place. Meanwhile, the Russians are doing classic pincer movements. Now, they're not doing it as rapidly as you might want to think, because the goal isn't just to do the pincer. The goal is to destroy Ukrainian military formations as you encounter them. And that's what they're doing. They're grinding through the Ukrainian military. They're going to meet outside the Ukrainian city of Dnipropetrovsk, and they're going to trap 60 to 120,000 Ukrainian military, the best in the Ukrainian military, trap them in the east. And when that happens, it's all over. They'll surrender or die. They're doing the same around Kiev. They're just grinding. By approaching Kiev, they've compelled the Ukrainians to split their logistics. They now have to support a major military defense around Kiev, as well as try and support the east. And it's hard to do logistics. War is all about logistics. I mean, you can have all the tanks you want in the world, but if they don't have gas, you got nothing. And
I'm sure as well a myriad of other little pieces and parts that have to go with it.
And the maintenance is an issue too. But let's just assume that everybody has well-maintained tanks. When you run out of gas, it doesn't matter. The tank becomes useless. Artillery, an interesting thing. You've seen these videos of the multiple rocket launch systems, MRLS, where okay, that's cool. Looks pretty, very destructive on the other end. But once you fire that off, you got a useless piece of junk. You got a vehicle with a bunch of tubes in it until you put more rockets in it. Those rockets have to come in a truck. That truck has to drive forward, and you need a bunch of those trucks if you're going to launch a big thing. Someone told me that in order for one MLRS battalion to be resupplied, it takes 90 trucks. Okay, now that applies to the Russians, and that applies to the Ukrainians. The Russians have been blowing up all the fuel depots they can find. The Russians have been blowing up all the ammunition depots. You got artillery, wonderful. You're highly trained in its use, great. You run out of ammunition, you got nothing. You got the best trained men in the world. They run out of food. They run out of water. They're just hungry and thirsty and waiting to give up. And this is what's happening to the Ukrainians. The Russians are grinding them, and the Ukrainians are grinding back. I mean, they're winning tactical victories, but operationally, the Russians are just pushing them and pushing them and pushing them. They're controlling the operational tempo, and they're succeeding in grinding the Ukrainian ability to wage cohesive warfare down to nothing. But now I really want to know, when was the last time a major Ukrainian unit had a resupply? And the answer probably is not recently, because if you move, you're getting killed. The Russians are blowing you up. So there, at some point in time, the Ukrainian military is going to cease being a cohesive, coherent fighting force. No matter how brave they are, no matter how well equipped they are, whatever, the Russians are grinding them down, and they're doing it with flipped math. 200,000 guys are grinding down 600,000 guys. It's one of the most amazing things. When this story is finally told, people are going to be studying forever. All these people right now are saying, oh, the Russians are doing so poorly. The Russians this. Maybe they are. Maybe I'm getting this all wrong. But, I've studied military history. I think I know how to read a map. I think I know how to look at, balance of forces. I think I know how to study logistics and stuff. I think I'm reading this right. And I'm pretty sure the Ukrainians know I'm reading this right. And I'm pretty sure the Russians know I'm reading this right. This war is closer to being over than many people think.
So what about all this talk of sending in aid and lethal weaponry and these so-called kamikaze drones?
Well, let's be clear. The Javelin missile has turned out to be one of the greatest assets the Ukrainians have, in addition to the bravery of their troops. I will never denigrate the courage, the tenacity, and the skill of a Ukrainian soldier. I mean, from a military perspective, they deserve everybody's admiration. These guys are putting up a heck of a fight, and we've given them some great tools. These javelins are killers. And the Russians, I don't think, when this first started, I don't think the Russians appreciated just how dangerous these javelins were. I think the Russians are learning, they're adapting their tactics, and they're making it more difficult for the Ukrainians to employ. The same thing with the Stinger. Now they're going to have a new weapon. These I forget the name of the drones, but there's a Stingers or something like that. It's fired like a mortar. A Stingray maybe.
Switchblade drones.
Switchblade, yeah. It looks like a mortar, and it fires it up, and then it goes out, and it's autonomous. You fire it, and it's done. It goes over, and it's looking, and it finds something. If it matches the database that it has, it goes down and it hits it. The thing about every system like that, they're going to fire a bunch. They might get 20, 30, 40 Russian vehicles, because they're going to kill a lot of Russians using this stuff. And that's one thing we'll get back to in a minute. But every system has its vulnerability, and the Russians are going to figure it out, and they're going to do something. They're going to jam it. They're going to figure out how to detect it, how to shoot it down, how to defend against it, depending on its warhead. Maybe the application of some chicken wire overhead might stop it. I don't know. But, the Russians will adapt. The thing is, this will not change the course of the battle. This will allow the Ukrainians to win tactical victories, but it won't change the operational and strategic reality of a Ukrainian defeat. What it is doing is killing Russians. And let's put on our American hats for a minute. Remember how glad everybody was that Qasem Soleimani was killed? I mean, because that SOB was responsible for killing 600 Americans in Iraq. That son of a gun was giving them IEDs and they were killing Americans, and we hate them. Well, guess what we're doing to Russians right now? We're killing Russians. And if you think the Russians aren't getting really, really mad at us right now, think again. They are furious. They are so angry, it's not even funny. And then someday there will be hell to pay. There will be a price, because if I've learned anything about the Russians, they're great people, but they don't forgive very easily.
I can imagine not. I want to scale back a little bit here to just before all of this started. You made an excellent point, and it reminded me of, well, I know somebody who likes to drink mainstream media Kool-Aid, so to speak, and they're all in on Ukraine and Ghost of Kiev and every propaganda bit that has come out about it. But he's saying, oh, NATO doesn't want Russia, or NATO doesn't want Ukraine in there at all, and that they've declined it. But you make the point that they were more like a proxy state of NATO. I mean, what would you say to somebody who's like, oh, well, that would never happen, they would never be in NATO, but why is NATO taking such a fancy to Ukraine, I guess would be a better way of putting it?
One of the great benefits of being in NATO, in fact, is the only benefit of being in NATO formally, is Article 5. Attack against one is attack against all. It's never really been tested, by the way. And there, if you read the article, there's no guarantee. First of all, it says an attack against one should be an attack against all, but every nation gets to consider on an individual basis what it's going to do in response, and the response doesn't necessarily have to be military in nature. We fooled ourselves into believing that Article 5 means everybody gets involved, because during the Cold War, we front-loaded Article 5. That NATO army that I was talking about, 250,000 Americans, 100,000 Brits, a whole bunch of Germans, all working together. It was front-loaded. Everybody deployed everybody up front, ready to meet the Russians if they came across. There wasn't going to be any mobilization, any meeting of the minds. They were on automatic war footing. That doesn't exist today. Today, all that military capacity has been dismantled and withdrawn. And in order to reconstitute it, nations are going to have to come together, order mobilization, and it's going to have serious economic costs. And it's just not automatic. The notion that NATO will automatically respond is absurd, especially depending on what's going on. I would imagine that if Russia out of the blue attacked Poland, that NATO might be motivated enough to come together and defend Poland. But if Poland was involved in regime change operations in Belarus and got engaged in Belarus, let's say under an Article 4 engagement, and Article 4 is the really dangerous aspect of NATO, because Article 4 is the consultation aspect, where Article 4 has been used, unlike Article 5, which was done one time right after 9/11 to put some AWACS aircraft over American airspace, totally symbolic, put some ships out in the Mediterranean, totally symbolic. It's never been used in a true combat environment. Article 4, on the other hand, was invoked to help dismantle the former Yugoslavia. Article 4 was invoked to bomb the capital of Serbia for 78 days. Article 4 was used to dispatch NATO troops to Afghanistan. Article 4 was used to remove Muammar Gaddafi from power in Libya. Article 4 has some teeth. It's operational. It's been used in offensive operations, and it's been used for regime change in Serbia for Slobodan Milosevic, in Afghanistan for the Taliban, and in Libya for Muammar Gaddafi. It was also used to send a NATO training mission, even though NATO didn't participate in the 2003 invasion. A NATO training mission went to Iraq in 2004, thereby providing legitimacy to what was a massive violation of international law. Article 4 is the risk. And right now we have Article 4 has been activated. Poland and the 3 Baltic nations have convened an Article 4 consultation about the situation in Ukraine. And this is a dangerous thing. In fact, next week they're going to have an emergency meeting. We're going to talk about what can NATO do about this. Let's get back to Ukraine. First of all, Ukraine was never going to be a member of NATO, not as it's currently constituted. One of the things about NATO is you can't allow a nation in if it's got ongoing territorial disputes, because by doing that under Article 5, you are automatically going to war. And so NATO says you have to be free of territorial disputes. You have to come in clean so that when we absorb you, we know what we're getting. We're not bringing in some conflict on its own. And Ukraine, because of Crimea, has an ongoing territorial dispute. Now, there was some talk a while back, and Russia even said before the current situation, the Russians said, look, our red line isn't Ukraine going to NATO per se. If you detach Crimea and the Donbass from Article 5, that means if you allow Ukraine in with the going in assumption that Crimea and Donbass will never be considered Article 5 issues, then we would not be happy about this, but we wouldn't do anything about it. That has changed. Obviously, that criteria changed, and they weren't happy about Ukraine. But the other thing is Ukraine is, and this is what people tend to forget, Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe. I mean, we've lionized Zelensky as if he's somehow the modern day incarnation of Churchill. We forget that this guy arrested his political opposition, shut down opposition media, and made a close alliance with neo-Nazis. But he's Jewish. He would never do that. Really? Then why is he handing out Hero of Ukraine medals to these guys? Why is he glorifying Stepan Bandera? No, he has made a deal with the devil in terms of the Azov battalion guys. But this is why they would never be allowed into NATO. NATO is a consensus-driven organization. There's 30 nations that have to agree. One nation objects. Ukraine's not a member, and there's a lot of nations that object to Ukraine being a member. But Ukraine's utility was never as a member. Ukraine's utility was as a thorn in Russia's side. Rand Corporation in 2019 published a study that was ordered by the Department of Defense. They didn't just make it up on their own. It was, how do we trip up Russia? What can we do to destabilize Russia down the road? The number one thing was to suck Russia into a conflict in Ukraine. And you say, well, wait a minute. So you're stating right up front that it's our goal to suck Russia in. Meanwhile, we built a permanent American training facility in Ukraine where the United States trains 5 battalions a year to NATO standards for the sole purpose, and I'm not making this up, there's a Department of Defense slide that shows this, we train 5 battalions a year to send them to the Donbass so they can kill Russians. Mm-hmm. So we're creating the conditions for a military conflict, and that's the utility of Ukraine. It exists in the minds of NATO and in the United States solely to destabilize Russia. That's all.
Would it be accurate to say that this is a buffer state war? So they're fighting over this buffer zone, basically. Is that?
It's bigger than that because Russia has made it clear that they're all in on the concept of redefining European security framework. The old NATO gets to expand any way it wants to and deploy its forces inside the NATO NATO territory, and those days are done. Russia said, no, that's over. We're not going to be satisfied until you withdraw non-national forces, meaning that if you're a Polish army guy, you stay in Poland. But if you're not Polish, you don't get to go to Poland. You have to go back to 1997 lines, meaning any expansion that took place prior to 1997 is okay. That means unification of Germany. But you can't go into the Baltics. You can't go into Romania, Bulgaria. You can't go into Hungary. You can't go into Poland. Those are basically NATO-free zones, meaning no non-national forces to be deployed. You have to dismantle the 2 anti-ballistic missile systems that are in Poland and Romania. And if you do this, then Russia will say, okay, we can live with that. Now, NATO has said that will never happen. I'm telling you right now, it's going to happen. It's going to happen because Russia is going to win this war. And then Russia has done something in Belarus that a lot of people aren't picking up on. The permanent redeployment of major Russian military formations, offensive military formations, combined with the deployment of Russian nuclear forces, they haven't done it yet, but they're going to, has changed everything in terms of the dynamic of NATO. And now NATO's question is going to be, how do we reverse that? And the only way you're going to reverse that is to pull your troops back to 1997. Now, there will be a Cold War for a while, but it's going to be too expensive. I mean, Europe can't afford to spend the hundreds of billions of dollars necessary to get their military up to the point where they can actually have a Cold War-like military formation facing off against Russia over the Belarus border. So, no, this is Ukraine's just the first initial movement of the chess pieces on a big chessboard, playing a game that Putin understands, but I don't think the West does yet.
We're looking at an economic war here as well, though. The U.S., NATO, Canada, we are in a sense at war already with Russia because of these economic sanctions and other measures that have been taken. How effective are those, and how do you see that affecting things overall?
Well, first of all, we'll just look at history. The history of sanctions has not been a good history. They don't work. We put, what was the term that we used on Iran? I don't know. I forget the ultimate sanctions or something like that. But basically, we hit Iran with everything we got, and they shrugged it off and said we don't care. And they do care. Look, let's not pretend that sanctions don't hurt. They do. They do. They don't change policy. All they do is actually make what could have been an inherently unpopular government very popular with their people because the people rally around the government and oppose those who are bringing the harm to them. They don't blame the government for the harm; they blame the ones sanctioning them. Sanctions they failed. I saw this firsthand in Iraq. Saddam in 1991 was a man who was about 3 months away from getting a 75-cent solution applied to him. That's the cost of a 9mm bullet that was going to be put in the back of his head by one of his generals because he lost a war, his economy was garbage, everything. But we sanctioned him. And Saddam was able to do one of the greatest transformations. He went from being a defeated leader to the great hero of the Iraqi people. The Iraqi people rallied around him, and he grew in power domestically. Sanctions don't work. Putin went into this war already pretty popular, 68%, 71%. His popularity rating is going to shoot up into the 80s if it's not already there. The other thing is the program of sanctions that we've applied only generate the outcome we want if Russia wants to be part of the West. Now, the interesting thing about Putin is that he always wanted to be part of the West. He early on in his tenure as president, he said, in fact, he said it the other day in a speech. He said, I went to Bill Clinton and said, look, if you guys want to expand NATO, why don't you just bring us in, and then it'll be one big happy family, and we'll just. That, of course, wasn't the American objective because our goal isn't to empower Russia. Our goal is to weaken Russia, and you weaken Russia by expanding up and exploiting their economy. The West is responsible for the rise of the oligarch class in Russia. We did that in the 1990s by bringing in carpetbaggers who facilitated the theft of state-owned property in the hands of a handful of people. We're responsible for the suffering. Any Russian that lived through the 1990s will tell you it was the worst decade imaginable. Humiliation galore. They suffered tremendously because of the policies imposed by the United States through Boris Yeltsin, their compliant little stooge. Boris Yeltsin, we support democracy so much that we had to buy an election in 1996 to keep him in power. The National Security Archives released recently transcripts of the conversations between Yeltsin and Clinton. And it's some of the most humiliating thing in the world to read. You see Yeltsin literally debasing himself, begging for Clinton to throw him a bone. Please don't go into Serbia. It's going to cause problems. Please don't expand NATO. Please don't do this. And Clinton ignored him. The last 2 years, there's a name on the list of Russians who are listening in, Vladimir Putin. Putin listened in. Now his president humiliated himself before an American president as the Americans turned their back on Russia, dragged their face to the mud, ground their face into the dirt. And Putin came in and said, never again. That's just not going to happen again. I'm going to turn this around. Putin doesn't want to reconstitute the Soviet Union. One of the greatest misquotes of all times is when Putin, they keep saying that, Vladimir Putin said that the greatest, political catastrophe in modern history or in the last century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And then they stop right there as if Putin is bemoaning the end of the Putin's glad the Soviet Union's gone. He recognizes it for what it was, a failed economic and political system. You got to listen to the rest of it because it made tens of millions of Russians homeless overnight, trapped in what used to be their home but is now a foreign land with no one to take care of them. Russia abandoned their own people. That's the tragedy. And Putin has said that will never happen again. I am going to take care of the Russian people. And he has moved forward to do this. But one of the things he found out, first of all, he inherited the oligarch class. Study what Putin did early on. He brought the oligarchs together and he gave them a choice. Get out of politics and you can keep your money. Play politics and you'll lose everything. And the ones that didn't believe him currently live in London. The ones that did believe him, have still reside there, but they're billionaires. And Putin has tried to work with them from an economy standpoint, but he's not a fan of the oligarchs. He views them as necessary evil.
He recently came out and said they're a bunch of traitors. Eh? So,
well, they are traitors. There's no doubt about it. But here's why he couldn't move on them. Putin is not a dictator. People need to understand that. He's a democratically elected president. He can lose an election. It's very possible for him to lose. It's not a guaranteed outcome, especially early on. He won his first elections by like 53%, 54%. That's That's not a lot. And the buffer is this middle class. About 20% of the vote are these apolitical middle class people whose economic well-being is intermeshed with the West, with all these Western companies that came in. They use their iPhones, they use PayPal. It's all there. And Putin recognized around 2005, 2006 that this economic dependence was a problem for Russia, that the West wasn't playing straight. The West was using this economic infiltration of Russia to destabilize Russia. They were coming in with these non-governmental organizations that were funneling money in to do nefarious deeds. I mean, anytime you have to buy a political party, which is what the West was doing, that means it doesn't really have a connection with its domestic constituency. And so Navalny and company, no, they're purely paid for by foreign interests. But Putin wasn't able to divorce from the West, because any move he made to disconnect would, those 20% of apolitical people would now become very political, and he could lose the election. So he had to proceed very carefully. The West just did Putin the greatest favor in the world, and they don't even realize how stupid they were in this. The West divorced itself from Russia, and Putin went, thank you. Thank you very much. Now I get to do what I always needed to do, because now you see the Russians saying, never again will we allow ourselves to be so beholden to the West that they can cause us strategic economic harm. Russia is decoupling from the West. Not only the West, the oligarchs. Putin is overjoyed that the West is targeting the oligarchs. He's thrilled that they're seizing their wealth. He's just giddy with joy that the oligarchs are being disenfranchised in Russia, because this purifies Russia from the standpoint of Western taint. And now Putin, people should also pay attention, when he met with Xi Jinping in Beijing on February 4th, right before the Olympics. They issued a 5,000-word joint statement, and everybody's focused on certain things like our friendship is better than an alliance, da 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 da. But what they should have focused on was that both the Russian leader and the Chinese leader said, we are done with the rules-based international order. That, of course, is the cornerstone of American foreign policy, NATO foreign policy, the rules-based international order, which is the institutions and rules that were put in place after the end of World War II by the United States to control the global economy. It put America at the top of the pyramid and was designed to keep America at the top of the pyramid. Russia and China said, no, we're now part of the law-based international order, and we are leaning more towards the United Nations Charter and the concept of a multipolar world. And everybody went, okay, yeah, but that's just rhetoric. But then they said, we are looking to create a trans-Eurasian economic union that will unite Russia, China, India, Iran, Pakistan, the Central Asian nations, with connectivity to Africa, to parts of Europe, to South America, a global economic union that will create an internal economic system independent of the United States and Europe, meaning they don't need them anymore. This is the reality of the world we live in, and it was only made possible by the sanctions that the United States sought to put on Russia. This is a double-edged sword. It's hurting Russia, but it's going to kill the West.
Yeah, because this also puts the U.S. dollar at risk, right, as the world's reserve currency. And if that happens, I would think that we're in a lot of trouble.
We're in a world of hurt if that happens. I'm not an economist, so I have to really tread carefully here. But I will say that there's two things. There's the world reserve currency, and then related to that is the petrodollar. Because it's because the whole world depends on oil, everything is sold in dollars. That's how transactions are done. When the United States,
to explain to people, that happened in 1974 when Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard, and Saudi Arabia required that all oil be purchased in U.S. dollars. So all oil that is sold is sold traded in US dollars. But if that changes, that reduces demand for the US dollar, and we've got all this money printed. Now you have an oversupply, and the currency could collapse.
It will collapse. Not could collapse. Look, right now, India, China, and Russia are engaged, and I forget the number. I think it's $30 billion deal that will only be done in rubles and rupees. They've already said we're not doing the dollar anymore. And one of the reasons that the United States, again, we're so short-minded. Biden was chuckling. Russia built up this $650 war chest. Ha ha ha. Well, we just seized 300 billion of it. They can't get access to it. And Russia's going, okay. What Russia might do, I heard, is if somebody's got $100 billion of Russian-owned U.S. currency stashed away, and the U.S. is saying that you can't get access to it, Russia may unilaterally pass legislation that automatically converts that holding into gold-backed rubles that appear in a Russian bank, and Russia says, we don't care about that money anymore. It's valueless. It has no value. We don't care. The money is now here. And if enough of the world recognizes that as legitimate, now somebody has $100 billion worth of U.S. currency, it's backed by nothing. It's just paper. And this could happen over and over and over again. There's already talk about Saudi Arabia selling all oil with China through the yuan, the Chinese currency. So this is the beginning of the end. And look, as an American, I'm not happy about this. I mean, if the dollar loses value, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to pay, my daughter's college loans? How are we going to pay for anything? It will be just absolute nightmare. But, I live in a country that's committing economic suicide. I mean, that's literally what's happening right now. And they're doing it because of the most narrow-minded policy posture imaginable, this Russophobic demonization of an entire nation in the personality of one man, Vladimir Putin. We've turned him into a cartoon figure bad guy. All the people that sit there and speak down, they don't even know the guy. If you actually the interesting thing about Putin is he's been around for 5 American presidents. And I make this following challenge. Take the inaugural address or any State of the Union address of any president, because those are the premier speech, written speeches. Those are the ones, those are the big dollar speeches, the ones that are supposed to have the lines that we remember forever. Take any one of those and compare it to your average Vladimir Putin speech, given off the cuff, no script, just speaking. Go to the Valdai conferences that he holds in Sochi and listen to this man talk. He is articulate, he is intelligent, he has facts at his fingertips, he's witty, he's humorous. This guy is literally one of the most intelligent politicians in the world. That doesn't mean that I worship the man. It doesn't mean that I think that, his breath doesn't stink or whatever. I know he puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else. All I'm saying is, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, you have to respect the fact that this guy is good at what he does. And so when I watch these amateur TV analysts sit there and turn him into a cartoon figure, all I'm thinking is you guys are slitting your own throat, because if you don't know your enemy is going to crush you. And if you're viewing Vladimir Putin as a problem, you have to define the problem accurately before you can come up with a solution. Because if you're trying to solve a problem without accurately defining what it is, you're solving nothing. And that's what's going on right now. America is implementing policy after policy after policy that is solving nothing because we haven't defined the problem properly.
That seems to me to be extremely dangerous, given that we're dealing with a nuclear power.
Yeah, I don't mean to laugh about this, but I mean, this is, I think it's the American Federation of Scientists or that have the doomsday clock or the Union of Concerned Scientists or something like that, and they keep playing with the time, to make point. And I understand why they do it, but if you want to just be honest about it, put it at 1 second to midnight, because that's where we are perpetually. because it doesn't matter what's going on. All you need is 1 second of a mistake. 1 second, the second before someone issues the order to launch a nuclear weapon, and it's all over. The world ends. This isn't happening anymore. And we're at 1 second to midnight every single day of the year, so long as the United States and Russia have the nuclear arsenals that they have. And it gets even more likely for an accident when you have lunacy such as taking place in Ukraine or even in Syria. Remember when Hillary Clinton was talking about imposing a no-fly zone over Syria and just was laughing off the concept of shooting down Russian airplanes? I mean, it's ludicrous. People need to understand that these nuclear weapons are real. And back in the 1980s, when I was in high school, I lived in a town called Marnheim, and right next to Marnheim was a little army base called Weierhof. The Weierhof was a housing area for military personnel who were guarding the largest nuclear weapons depot in Europe, which meant that the balloon went up, we were all going to die in a flash because that was going to be the first place hit by a Russian nuke. They were going to take out all our nukes before we could get them into the field. And we joked about it, saying that, we won't even know what happened. We'll be asleep and it's done. And my father was in the military, and every once in a while he would disappear into the bunker when tensions got high. And, imagine being a kid, knowing that you live next to the principal nuclear target for the Soviets, and your dad's now in a bunker because there might be a war with the Soviets. We took nuclear war seriously. This is why I was such a believer in the INF Treaty. Getting rid of those missiles was the best thing we could do for humanity at the time. And yet, the United States has backed out of every single major arms control agreement that had any meaning. We're still involved in New START, but we don't take it seriously. We cheat on that continuously. And we're now talking about sending back to Europe intermediate nuclear forces, missiles, recreating the situation that existed in the 1980s. What kind of insanity is this? I mean, and the American people don't care. Literally, I'm looking at these. I'm sorry, my fellow Americans, but you're idiots. You are literally the dumbest people in the world, the most ignorant people in the world about the world you live in. I challenge your average American to pass a geography test, pass a world history test. They can't. They don't know, they have no perspective on what's going on in their name and the dangers that are attached to them. At least in the 1980s, we all knew why we were going to die. Your average American has no clue why they're about to die.
You should see some of the politicians we have in Canada, maybe. Me and Rick had said this before, that I think what the wild card in this situation is we have a president like Joe Biden, a prime minister like Pierre Trudeau, Boris.
Trudeau?
Justin Trudeau. Not enough coffee this afternoon, by the way. Justin Trudeau. We got Boris Johnson in UK. Nobody is too happy about these people, and their competency does not seem to be too great. How worried should we be about these individuals maybe starting nuclear war before maybe Putin ever would?
Well, again, I don't think a nuclear war is going to happen on purpose. I think it's going to happen by accident. I will say this for the Biden administration, that so far they're saying the right things when it comes to a no-fly zone. So far they are, but it's Joe Biden is a political animal, and every week that goes by, you see people creating more and more justification for a no-fly zone. Next week we have an emergency meeting of NATO. What are they going to be talking about? No-fly zone? Probably not, because everybody said no. What they could be talking about is the creation of a humanitarian corridor inside Ukraine to handle the 10 million refugees that are going to be coming across the border pretty soon. They're already at 2 million and they're saturated. They can't take anymore. But what happens when the Russians start closing the deal on some of these military operations and the Ukrainians wake up to the fact that it's over and all of them start running? You're going to have a nightmare at the border. And NATO is going to say, well, we have to go in and we have to secure that. We have to provide the humanitarian assistance there so they don't come here. How do you do that power projection without the Russians thinking that you're interfering with their operation? Very dangerous situation. So there's a lot of room for miscalculation. And none of these guys give me confidence because they all say stupid things. Joe Biden, Putin is a war criminal. No, he's not. Do you even know what a war crime is? I mean, you should because you've committed several yourself. But let's make the case before you pass sentence. Let's find out if the Russians did everything they've been accused of. My understanding is the Russians have come in as soft as possible early on. They have not used all the military power that they could have. They've suffered tremendous casualties as a result. And I'll give you again, I talk about military math all the time because, the one thing about when you do things over and over and over again, patterns develop. And in modern times, we've noticed that in major wars that are fought in areas where civilian populations live, that the ratio of death is usually 1-to-1. The 50% of the overall casualties that are suffered are going to be civilian casualties. The other 50% will be military casualties. Let's just assume so right now the United Nations says it's somewhere around 800 civilians have died. That's 800 too many. I'm not minimizing any of this. My heart bleeds for the innocents caught in this war. 800. I think there's conservative. You could say that the Russians have lost between 1,000 and 4,000 guys, depending on where you're going. And this 10,000 number is ridiculous. Ukrainians have lost between 6,000 and 10,000. They're getting slaughtered. Let's go with the conservative thing. Let's say 1,000 dead Russians, 6,000 dead Ukrainians. That's 7,000 dead soldiers, 800 dead civilians. That's not even close to a 1-to-1 correlation. You could even come up and say, well, they've killed 2,000 civilians. Okay, that's a 3.2 to 1. The point I'm trying to get at is that if the Russians were just playing normal rules of the game, I'm not saying war crimes, I'm just saying the normal rules of the game, there should be 8,000 dead civilians. There's not. Why? Because the Russians are going out of their way. Where civilians are dying because the Ukrainians have dug into urban areas. And therefore, the Russians have no choice but to launch artillery strikes and everything to prepare the battle for the fight. And civilians are dying there. The notion that the Russians are going out of their way to kill civilians is ludicrous, insane. It's just the opposite. The Russians are putting themselves at risk on purpose so as to not needlessly put Ukrainian civilian lives at risk. Yes, people are dying. Yes, it's horrible. Yes, mistakes are made. But no, Russia's not sitting there saying, how many civilians can I kill today? Because believe me, if they were saying that, the numbers would be horrific.
Yeah. Would you? There's been a whole lot of talk about the maternity hospital and stuff like that, but there's conflicting information on the internet. How likely do you think it is that these locations were storing, whether it be military personnel or supplies, that sort of thing? How likely do you think that these places were actually military targets as opposed to like a hospital or something?
I don't know. I mean, this is one of those areas where I don't know. What I can say is this. If that was an air-delivered munition, we know that NATO tracks every Russian airplane flying over Ukraine. Now, the Russians have said that no airplanes flew over the maternity hospital on the day that it was bombed. Okay, there's a nice little fact point. NATO, if you're accusing the Russians of a war crime, show me the radar track. Tell me what airplane took off from where, flew over Mariupol at what time. And then I can say, Russia, you lied. We actually have an Su-34 capable of dropping a 500-pound bomb flying over Mariupol about the time of the impact. So now, do you want to reconsider your statement? We can do that. Or we can say, there was no airplane flying over, so now we have to ask the question, what happened? Now, the Russians could change, provide the intelligence. During the Gulf War, one of my jobs was targeting. And I helped prepare target folders, and then I would do the battle damage assessment of them afterwards. But every target had to be checked for legitimacy under international humanitarian law, under the laws of war. Is this a legitimate target? Or, what are the chances civilians are? And one of the great targets that we hit, that when I say great in terms of notoriety, was the Amaria bomb shelter. Over 400 Iraqi civilians died because of that attack. And people have been calling the United States war criminals. Well, I was involved in that. I'm here to tell you right now that we scrubbed that site. We believed we were hitting a legitimate target. We thought that there was a military, we had very good reason I can't go into right now unless they've declassified it, but very good reason that there were presidential level communications emanating from that structure, and that was being used by high level Iraqi command and control at a time when eliminating high level command and control for the Iraqis was one of our top priorities. We had no reason to believe that that place was filled with civilians. If they were, let's say Saddam Hussein himself was down there, but someone said there's 400 civilians, we would not have bombed it because we can't justify the military gain with the loss. The Russians operate using the same methodology. I know these Russian officers. They're some of the most highly trained, highly moral people you'll ever meet. These are not amateurs. These are not Conan the Barbarian. These are professionals who understand the laws of war, and they prepare the same target packages. So if they drop the bomb, ask yourself, why did the bomb land in the middle of the square? Because maybe what they were trying to get are the armored vehicles that the Ukrainians tended to park in the periphery. The Russians said days before this that the hospital had been emptied, and that the Azov people were using it as a military site. I'd like to see the Russian intelligence on this. I'd like them to provide the target folder. I'd like them to provide the intelligence, the photographs, whatever they use to sustain this. Until they do so, all we can say about this is we don't know. We don't know. We don't know what happened. The same thing with this theater. I mean, you got the very dramatic, children, dieti. Okay, great. And the Russians said, we know it's there. We know it says children. The Russians on this one are there's no ambiguity here. We knew this target was there. We actually put a big do not bomb sign on it. So anybody that coming over there would not even drop anywhere near there. We also are telling you that the Azov people put explosives in the roof, and they were going to wait for an airplane to come over and then to blow it up. No airplane flew over Mariupol the day that went off. That's the Russians saying. Again, if NATO has the track, show me. Say, no. There was an Su-24 that took off from Rostov and flew over, and it was over there right about the time it went boom. Okay, now we turn to the Russians, say you have a lot to answer for. But on this one, I actually tend to believe, because the Russians aren't stupid. Why commit to a fact set that can be readily discounted? Why say no planes flew over if NATO can provide radar tracks to show a plane flew over? And I feel that way very strongly about the theater, less so about the maternity ward, because Lavrov has changed his story a couple of times. The first time he said, no, under no circumstance did we drop a bomb. Later on he said, if it was attacked, it was because there was military forces in the area. Well, it's one or the other, buddy. You either didn't drop a bomb or you did. Make up your mind, stick to the story, and then we can evaluate it. But on the theater, I'm taking the Russian side right now because that's what the fact set suggests.
And I guess we're looking at a situation where the Ukrainians, maybe the Azov battalion, they're doing some of these things, blowing some of their own stuff up for propaganda purposes.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Look, they've lost the Battle of Mariupol. I mean, that city's gone. All they can do right now is turn it into a Pyrrhic victory for the Russians, both in terms of manpower losses, but also, more importantly, the political casualty. And truth is, one of the first casualties of war. The Azov battalion is trying to sustain the notion of Russia as a war criminal state, to generate more outrage, more support, etc. The Russians need to do a better job, to be honest. I mean, I don't know whoever's coming up with their PR, but do a better job, man, because right now you've lost the PR war. There's that old joke about the two Soviet soldiers in Berlin at the fall of the Berlin. You got the Soviet flag over the Reichstag, and the guy's going, well, we won the battle for Berlin, but we lost the information war, meaning, everybody thinks you lost the battle, but you won it. The Russians right now are winning the battle on the ground, but they're losing the PR fight around the world. And I don't think Russia took this aspect of this conflict that seriously. I don't think they understood the extent to which there was going to be this sophisticated information warfare being waged, not just by Ukraine, but on behalf of Ukraine, by the CIA, by MI6, by State Department, by the British Foreign Ministry. If you think for a second that Zelensky's writing his own scripts, think again. These are scripts. When he spoke before the British Parliament, I can guarantee you there was an MI6 agent someplace there, quoting Henry V and quoting Winston Churchill. When he spoke to the American Congress, there's a CIA agent somewhere scripting, his references to Martin Luther King and everybody else he quoted in that speech. This is information warfare. It's a reality of the modern of the age we live in, and Russia's not doing a very good job at it. Everybody talks about the prowess of Russian information war. I mean, come on, they convinced every American to vote for Donald Trump, apparently. Apparently these guys are supposed to be the best information warriors in the world. Well, they suck right now. They're not doing a good job.
Yeah, they were supposed to be behind the truckers convoy in Canada too, but
they fabricated Hunter Biden's laptop.
Except they did. The New York Times finally admitted that they didn't.
Yeah. So, should we expect to see the Russians come in harder now and escalate more to try to bring this to some sort of conclusion now that they've kind of given them warning after warning and they're not surrendering? The peace talks don't seem to be going where they need to go.
Well, remember, for the Russians, the peace talks, they don't care. I mean, they're not there to negotiate. They're there to accept surrender. The Russians have set out some terms, and the terms are stark. And the Ukrainians have to abide by these terms. And right now, Ukraine's not there, so the war will continue. But there's this misperception again. I keep hearing, on cable news, the Russian offensive has stalled outside of Kiev. Really? How do you know that? Well, they're because they haven't taken Kiev yet. Do you really think that Russia wants to get involved in street-to-street fighting in a city the size of Kiev with 3 million residents? Are you high? That would require 800, 900,000, 1 million troops. Russia came into all of Ukraine with 200,000. So the Russians aren't stalled. The Russians are doing exactly what they want. The Kiev operation is a strategic fixing operation in the similar way that I talked about the Donetsk and Lugansk militias fixing 120,000 Ukrainian forces down there. By moving on Kiev the way they did, they have sucked in a huge amount of Ukrainian forces to defend Kiev, and now they've fixed them there. And these forces have to be sustained. And that means that all that fuel and ammunition that could be going down here to eastern Ukraine ain't going down to eastern Ukraine anymore. It's going into Kiev. And all Russia has to do is maintain its presence, keep a little bit of pressure going on the east and the west flank, punch a little bit here, punch a little bit there, and they're winning. They're not going to take Kiev. They don't need Kiev. They don't want Kiev. They can't take Kiev. I mean, they don't have enough people to take Kiev. What they want is Zelensky to surrender. And here's the important thing that people need to understand. Zelensky is the critical factor in this. He needs to surrender. Why? Because he has been, and this again is where the West made a strategic mistake. By letting Zelensky speak to the British Parliament, the American Congress, the German Parliament, they have certified him as the legitimate leader of Ukraine. What Zelensky wants is okay by us. So if Zelensky says, I surrender, I accept Crimea to be permanent part of Russia, I accept the independence of Lugansk and Donetsk, and I accept neutrality in perpetuity, the world can't say, oh, you don't have a right to do that. You're not the legitimate leader of Ukraine. He is. If they kill Zelensky or he somehow is made a casualty, there will be a provisional government set up in Warsaw with a leader picked by NATO who is going to forever say from the safety of Warsaw that we don't accept anything the Russians did. And therefore, Russia's going to be living in a permanent nightmare. Russia needs Zelensky. Zelensky is the key. So they're not going to take Kiev. They're not going to kill Zelensky. They're going to grind his military down to nothing. And then they're going to compel him at some point in time to say, I have no choice but to accept these terms. And when he accepts those terms have to be accepted by the United States and Europe as well.
So
That's why they. Sorry, go ahead, Brandon.
It's got to be asked, then. I mean, how serious is this guy really about any type of peace talks, then, if he's going to every parliament around the world and every government around the world begging for a no-fly zone? It's kind of an oxymoron, or it's ironic.
I think the way I view the no-fly zone from the Ukrainian perspective, first of all, I respect that Zelensky's not a moron. All right? I'm not going to sit here and do it. I think that man is far smarter, for instance, than Boris Johnson. I think he's far smarter than Justin Trudeau. I think he's heads over heels smarter than Joe Biden. He's a smart guy. He's in a horrible situation. He's also a guy who's very vulnerable at home to neo-Nazis, to these right-wingers. If he goes out and surrenders off the cuff, as the neo-Nazis have said, he'll be hanging from the neck until dead on a Kiev street. They've threatened him with that. So he has to be careful. By continuously hounding about the no-fly zone, he's creating the artificial notion that had Ukraine been provided no-fly support, they could have won the war. He's creating the conditions of his surrender. So he can say, we fought to the last man. We fought to the bitter end, but we were betrayed by NATO. And you already hear this coming out from him, where he's saying that, NATO's not here for us. NATO's not here to back us. This is going to become the political cover he needs to do the surrender that must eventually happen. Sadly, it's going to require the sacrifice of thousands of his citizens. And that's the tragedy of it all, because ultimately, all of this could have been avoided had he just accepted these terms up front before Russia went in. All Russia wanted was neutrality, no more NATO in your soil, recognize Crimea, and they didn't even want independence for Lugansk and Donetsk. They just wanted the Minsk Accords to be implemented so that these territories will remain part of Ukraine but have special autonomy status. That's gone. They're independent now.
They're probably, and I've said this from the beginning, that they're just making things worse for themselves by, and Zelensky's making it worse for the country. In the end, he's going to lose, and he won't have any bargaining power at all, no leverage to negotiate anything. He'll just have to accept whatever is imposed.
No, that's true. I think, but first of all, understand that that was always going to be the case. He never had a bargaining position. If you know anything about Russia and Russian leadership, they don't back down. They don't bluff. They very rarely take maximalist positions going in because they don't want to trap themselves in with no leeway. Here they came in with a maximalist position because they had spent the past 7 years getting backed into a corner by the expansion of NATO, by the training of the Ukrainian military. They had no choice. The conditions they put down in December were conditions that were not flexible. They weren't going to yield on any of this. And once Russia made the decision to cross the border and sacrifice Russian troops in support of this operation, there will be no yielding. Russia doesn't quit. Now, if this thing dragged on for 10 years like the Soviet experience in Afghanistan, yeah, you could get a strategic defeat of that nature. But Russia's not here to occupy Ukraine. There will be no permanent presence of Russian forces in Ukraine when this is done. There might be a redrawing of the border. I'm here to say that I don't think Mariupol will be a Ukrainian city ever again once the Russians get it. I think Putin will say, you have forfeited your right to the city because of what you forced the Russian-speaking population to go through the presence of the Azov Battalion and their insistence on destroying the city. But, the bottom line is Zelensky will accept the terms that Russia's putting forward because he has no choice. He will have no choice in the end.
Interesting. Now, I've been kind of worried about about this particular issue, and I think you're probably the best person to ask it to. I have asked other veterans that we've had on the show, but what do you think of these weekend warriors going out to Ukraine and joining up with their forces? So we have Canadian citizens and there is English citizens, and I'm not sure about Americans. I haven't seen too much of that, but I'm sure it's happening where they're going over there. What are your thoughts on that? And could it be disastrous on the international stage if Putin has a bunch of foreign nationals in his possession?
Well, just start off with who these people are. And I don't mean as individuals, I'm talking about as a class. Are they, for instance, a reincarnation of the Lincoln Brigade? You know, those starry-eyed do-gooders who rallied behind the cause of Spaniards opposing fascism. They fought alongside, the communists to take on Adolf Hitler, and that nature. Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking, because you're here, this is the International Brigade. This is the Foreign Legion of the Ukrainians. I mean, romantic terms. Okay, but that's not who's going over there. I mean, if that was the case, I'd expect to see a bunch of college kids and hippies, really liberal, mountain bikers and guys who hike in them, fit people who are really concerned about the world. Legitimately so. I'm not mocking them. I'm saying there's a certain class of people that went to fight for the Lincoln Brigade, workers, things of that nature, people who are politically aligned with the movement. I don't see that at all. I see people saying, we're here for Ukraine. No, you're not. You're here because you somehow think war is glorious. You're here because you want to make money. That makes you a mercenary. And the lowest form of scum on the earth is the mercenary. And I say that as a former professional soldier. All right. If you're going to kill people, you better have the damn flag of your country sewn on the shoulder of your uniform, and you better have taken an oath to your country, because that's the only legitimacy you can have going forth to take human life. That's it. If you're going out there as a mercenary, you're a criminal. You are a criminal class. And I don't care if you're a private military contractor, professional military, PMI, PMC, whatever you want to call them. You're a mercenary. You're taking money to do a job that's normally done by professional soldiers. So you're scum right off the bat. I have no use for any of you. But let's just say for a second that there was this professional mercenary class, guys who woke up every morning, lifted weights, went for 10-mile hikes with the 60-pound pack on their back, practiced shooting every day at lunch, so they were proficient in their weapons, and they were going over there. They're still scum, but at least they're well-trained scum, meaning they can fight. We're not getting that. What we're getting is a bunch of late 20s, early 30s guys who 10 years ago went to Iraq or Afghanistan and got all pumped up on the notion of kicking down a door and terrorizing villagers, doing raids on goat herders, and thinking that was war, thinking that this one-sided thing that was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan somehow constituted real war. And they've gone home, they've gotten soft. In their closets, they have their uniforms and they have the gear that they bought at the Army Navy store. And suddenly there's this notion they can go kill Russians, because apparently killing Russians is easy. I mean, it's not a problem, these Russians, nobody. And so
the ghost of Kiev had no problem.
None, or the 13 guys on Snake Island. But so they head over there, and these guys are out of shape. They don't have a skill set. They haven't even trained with one another. I mean, let's say they were all really good soldiers. If you put them together and they've never trained with another, they're going to die instantly, because the military isn't about the individual. The military is about the team, how well the team functions. These guys aren't a team. They're going over there. They're fat. They're out of shape. They have no skill set. And then they're put together into a unit that has no cohesiveness, and they're put into a frontline situation, and the outcome is always the same. They get annihilated because they don't know how to fight, and they aren't even prepared for the fight they're getting into. The stories about, oh my God, we're being hit by artillery all the time. Yeah, welcome to modern warfare. Oh my God, there's heavy fire coming in all the time. Yep, that's modern warfare too. This ain't the Taliban. This isn't Iraqi insurgents. This isn't ISIS. These are Russians, and they're going to kill you. And now we go to the Russian side of the story, because this is the most important aspect of it. The Russians have no tolerance for these people, none whatsoever. When the Russian military spokesperson said, the best thing that's going to happen to you, the best thing is that you're going to be treated like a criminal, prosecuted. That's the best you can hope for. They have no rights. They will not be treated as prisoner of war because they have no prisoner of war status. They have no status. These are people that literally, if I were a Russian officer and I captured them, I would put them up against the wall. I would look at their paperwork, ascertain that they don't represent Ukrainian military forces in any legal capacity, and I would shoot them. And nobody could do anything about it because that's what I am allowed to do. Execute them in summary fashion. But even then, they're not going to get that. What these guys are going to get is what they're getting, which is to be blown up in their sleep, or to be gunned down, and their last moments will be in some Ukrainian field trying to stuff their guts back into their belly because they got split open crying for their mommy, trying to get on their cell phone to call their girlfriend to tell them how they're screaming and suffering. That's it. That's what you're going to get. Hopefully you die instantly so there won't be any suffering, but that's not how war works, man. You're going to lose a limb. You're going to bleed out. You're going to get paralyzed. Your brain's going to work while your body doesn't function, while a tank runs over you. This is what's going to happen. So any one of you would-be mercenaries listening to this, don't go, because it won't end well for you. It won't end well at all. You're going to die. You're going to rot in a Russian prison, which is worse than death, or you're going to be humiliated and sent packing back home, where you're going to have to go to a bar and explain to everybody how you got your butt kicked in Kiev.
Yeah, I think that last one there was probably a least likely scenario. I think some of these individuals have great capacity to be used as international pawns in the bigger scheme of things. Like, we see it all the time. China currently has Canadian citizens in their possessions, and they say, oh, well, they committed a crime and this, that, and the other thing, right? So I believe America has a women's basketball player that's currently in their possession, and whatever she was arrested for, God knows.
Cannabis oil.
it creates a big problem, right?
Right, but see, these people have rights.
Yeah.
I mean, even though they're held by Chinese and Russians, they were given due process. Mm-hmm. They were afforded a trial. They were given a hearing. These mercenaries aren't going to be given any of that. I mean, they have no rights, none. There's going to be no trial. They're going to be basically taken and thrown into a gulag. And believe me, the hardest place in the world is the Russian gulag. Those stories you see about the mafioso guys with their prison tattoos and all that stuff, it's real. These are really tough guys. And if you take a would-be fat, soft around the middle mercenary and throw them into a Russian prison and tell the Russian prisoners, have at it, boys. It's all she wrote. There won't be any, bargaining chip or nothing. There's no mercy. A bargaining chip is when somebody has value. You view them as a human. You can trade them. These mercenaries have no value. They're going to die. That's it. The Russians don't view them as human beings.
So this week we saw Zelensky address Canadian Parliament. He addressed Congress, asked for more help. Do you think that is a factor in the way things are going to play out? And it seems to me that continuing to send lethal aid, weapons, money to buy more weapons, money that's going to put weapons into the hands of some of these Nazi battalions, it seems to and we saw them all stand and clap, but in Canada alone, we're looking at, I think, almost $500 million in money and night vision goggles and a bunch of other stuff. And I think there's more to come. To me, that seems misguided. It's just likely to prolong things and end up with more people being dead.
It's going to make it more lethal. I don't think it's going to prolong anything. The die's already been cast. It's over. It's all over, but the final sentence has to be written in the final chapter. What's going to happen, though, is, again, the Russians have been very, very, it surprised me, to be honest, because I've studied the Russian military, and the notion of them having the soft touch. What I didn't appreciate, and I do now, is that the Russians actually view Ukraine as a brother. It's a brother Slav country. They don't have animosity, or at least they didn't at the start. There wasn't hatred. They weren't crossing the border into Nazi Germany. So they were trying to go to war, lacking the one thing that you absolutely have to have when you go to war, which is hatred. I mean, if you're a military guy and you don't hate your enemy, you're in trouble, because the second you hesitate, the second you view them as a human, they're going to get you. You got to go in and just say, I'm hard. They're all going to die. I'm going to respect the law of war, but there's no mercy. There's no fair fight. There's no even fight. There's no giving them a chance. Kill them all and bring all your people home. That's the way you wage war. And the Russians went in saying, no, we're going to go soft. We don't want to kill them all. They haven't been hitting the Ukrainian barracks. Well, they did today. I don't know if you saw what happened outside of Nikolaev, but a brigade got hit. It's awful, horrible, but hundreds of people are dead. And this is going to happen again because the Russians are tired of this. So far, they haven't hit the convoys coming in. I think you're going to find these NATO convoys that have been coming in. So far, the Russians have waited for them, offload their stuff, and get them into warehouse. And unfortunately, when that happens, some of it leaks through to the battlefield. The Russians are going to shut this thing down. They've already said, don't try and bring in an S-300 surface-to-air missile system because we're going to blow it up at the border. Please count on it, 100% certainty. We're going to do it. And they're going to start becoming more lethal at the border, too. You're going to see more and more strikes because they're just fed up. They're fed up. They're tired of losing men by being nice, by trying to be reasonable. NATO's not being reasonable. The West is not being reasonable. Canada's not being reasonable. Sending all this lethal aid is not reasonable because the second you send it in, what you're saying is we want dead Russians. And a Russian's going to take umbrage at that. And sooner or later, they're going to say, well, then if you want death, we're going to give you death. And, this is anecdotal, but if you go online and take a look at the anti-piracy efforts by the different navies in the off the coast of Somalia and see how different forces handle it. When you look at the Russians, there's no mercy. They sink the ship and they kill every pirate in the water. And they just do it without smiling or not. They just kill everybody. Other people want to disable the ship and then come in and capture the pirates. They want to do this. Russians just, no, we're going to kill them all because the pirates are like mercenaries. They're scum. They're less than human. They're going to die. Russia's going to start to view the convoys and the people that man these convoys, bringing these weapons in, as less than human, scum. And they're going to kill them. And the Russians are pretty violent. They're capable of great violence. They haven't demonstrated that yet, but they are capable. Just ask the Germans. Ask the people that defended Berlin. Ask the people that defended Stalingrad. Ask the people that fought them in the great battles of the destruction of Army Group Center. How much mercy the Russians showed them when it came time. None.
So do you have any sense of how much time we're looking at here?
It's hard to say because I don't know the exact situation for the Ukrainians. I don't know, they've shown great resilience. I mean, like I said, at the end of the day, people are going to be writing books about what the Russians did. People are going to be writing books about what the Ukrainians did as well. There's no dishonor in anything that they've done in terms of their defense of their homeland. They've fought very hard, and they've proven themselves to be capable defenders of their homeland. I don't know what they have left. It's hard to say. If I knew how much fuel they had, if I knew how much ammunition they had, if I knew what their food supplies were, you hear Kiev say that, if we get surrounded, we have a week's worth of food. Well, okay, but that means that if you're not surrounded, you have to keep supplying that food. And where's that coming from? And to what extent has Russia tried to cut off food supply to Kiev? I mean, it seems to me Russia's left trains running. I mean, one of the first things in a normal war is I'm going to blow up every train track. There's going to be no trains running. The Russians have allowed trains to run throughout the country. The Russians have allowed truck convoys to run. They've allowed a civilian domestic redistribution of resources to civilian populations to continue to exist. So they haven't shut that down yet. So it's hard to say how much more the Ukrainians can take. And again, I think the Russians, they have to pace themselves, because at the end, they need Zelensky to surrender. If you go too fast, you could cause Zelensky to get thrown out. If you go too long, you could, cause yourself to peter out. I mean, even though the Russians are winning right now, they could still lose this if this drags on forever. So they have to find the appropriate mix. And then unfortunately, now we're talking about using political objectives to define military capabilities. This could be ended tomorrow if Russia wanted. Literally, they have the weaponry to make this all go away. And I'm not talking about nuclear. I'm just saying that they have capabilities they haven't employed yet. They don't want to employ it. They don't want to kill Ukrainian civilians. They don't even want to kill Ukrainian soldiers. If you fight, you die. But they're not, like I said, until recently, they weren't hitting the barracks. They weren't hitting the Ukrainians at their weakest. They weren't hitting troop formations that they could hit easily. That may change now. So this could end this week. This could end next week. This could end in a month. I can't see it going much longer than that, though, because, at some point in time, the Ukrainians are going to just run out of capacity to defend. They're going to run out of fuel. They'll run out of ammunition, and the supplies aren't going to come in. The Russians are going to shut that down. And when you shut that down, the Ukrainians lose hope. They lose hope. And without hope, you really can't resist anymore.
So what do you think victory looks like for the Russians, or for the Ukrainians, for Zelensky? I guess his idea of victory would be to force the Russians to leave the country, but it doesn't look like that's even close to likely to happen. So for the Russians, what does victory ultimately look like?
They've set the terms. Victory will be denazification. What does denazification look like? It's the absolute destruction of all military formations that have been imbued with neo-Nazi ideology. It could be the going into Lvov and eliminating the political parties that have endorsed this right-wing ideology. I don't know if Russia wants to do that. That's, again, a major military move. But even if they don't do that, to get Zelensky to agree to enact legislation that outlaws Stepan Bandera, removes him as a national hero. This, of course, is that Nazi from Ukraine's past who collaborated with Hitler, the man who sent 80,000 guys to join the Waffen-SS, who had the Ukrainian auxiliary police murder 30,000 Jews at Babi Yar. Not a good guy, and yet he's the national hero of Ukraine today. They have statues, streets named for him. That all goes away. Bandera will be outlawed. Just like Hitler was outlawed in post-World War II, Germany, Bandera will be outlawed. That's denazification. Demilitarization is simply your military cannot be part of NATO, can't be equipped by NATO, trained by NATO. There can be no foreign forces in there. Permanent neutrality. There will be whether they want to, call it Austrian style neutrality, Finnish style neutrality, Swiss, I don't know. Whatever they end up calling it, it's going to be permanent. And then the recognition that Crimea is Russia and Donetsk and Lugansk are independent. There may be an expansion of Donetsk to include Mariupol, because I don't see Russia allowing that city with its Russian population to be turned over to the Ukrainians after what has happened to them. When the true story of what has happened in Mariupol comes out, the world will be ashamed of supporting a Ukrainian government that allowed this to happen. That's victory. That's victory for Russia. Victory for Zelensky will be survival and able to retain as much of Ukraine intact as possible. I mean, that's it. That's all he can hope for.
I've heard some analysts say that Biden could be the man of the hour, or maybe some, you get Macron to come in, or some other European leaders to try to arbitrate an end to this thing. But it just doesn't seem to be in the cards at this point. It looks like it's just going to have to play out.
What cards does Biden have today? Oh, what is he going to come back and say, okay, we're going to lift sanctions? Russia doesn't care anymore. Russia doesn't want the sanctions lifted. Russia is decoupling. So Biden has no cards. And let's also understand this about the economic. Russia has not cut off any energy supplies. The only energy termination has been unilateral on the part of the West, the United States, saying we're not going to buy Russian oil anymore. Although my understanding is we still have some tankers on their way to American ports because we haven't found a alternative to the Russian oil yet. Our refineries are geared to a specific grade of crude that used to be produced in Venezuela. But when we sanctioned Venezuela, we replaced it with a similar grade crude coming out of Russia, the only place in the world that produces it. And now we're just going to stop buying that, but we haven't solidified our deal with the Venezuela. Oh, thanks, Joe. Well thought out plan here. But Russia hasn't cut off any pipelines. This is the most amazing thing. They're still shipping gas through pipelines on Ukrainian soil and depositing the billions of dollars of transit fees into accounts controlled by the Ukrainian government. Russia is complying with every contractual obligation it has regarding the provision of energy. They haven't violated a single contract, and they won't. They're waiting for the West to violate the contracts. And then when they do, some amazing things are going to happen. Like all of Europe will go dark. The European economy will cease to exist. Factories will shut down. They're already shutting down in France because the price of gas is so high. The Michelin tire factory can't stay open, can't produce anything. And that's with Russia continuing to provide the energy. If Russia wanted to play hardball, they just hit the off switch, and all of Europe shuts down instantly. Because no matter what Biden said going in, we have a plan. He doesn't have a plan. There is no plan B. There is no energy alternative. When you deny Europe 30 to 40% of the energy it needs and you have nothing to replace, that means 30 to 40% of your economy shuts down. But that's not how economies work. When you shut down 40% of the economy, you shut down 100% of the economy. It's all she wrote. So the West is hyping up the pain that's being felt by Russians. And believe me, my wife has a brother over there. We know what's going on. We know the pain that they're feeling. This is real pain. This is not good. But the pain that they're feeling is nothing compared to the pain that could be brought to bear on Europe if Putin wanted to do that. But the Russians have always said, we will not use energy as a weapon. And they never have. They never have. The only one using energy as a weapon is the West. And sooner or later, you're going to find out that weapon they're wielding is a double-edged sword that cuts deeper on their side than on the Russian side.
Robert Starr says, biolabs, WF NATO dimension. Can we get some thoughts on this whole issue surrounding the biolabs?
Sure. I'll just start off by saying that I wasn't involved in any of that stuff. But some of my best friends were. Some of my best friends were the program managers of these biolabs. And I've talked to them extensively about this before and since. First of all, there's nothing secret about these biolabs' existence. It's not classified. Even though maybe many people in the world didn't know about it, these are unclassified programs that are part of what's called the Cooperative Threat Reduction effort that was spearheaded by Senator Nunn and Senator Lugar back in the aftermath of the demise of the Soviet Union. One of the concepts of cooperative threat reduction was if you have a nation like the Soviet Union that had nuclear weapons programs, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons programs, chemical weapons, biological weapons programs, biological weapons. It's not just about getting rid of the weapons or bringing them under control. It's about what happens to the people that built these weapons, that made these weapons, especially when you start shutting down the vehicle of their employment. For instance, if we shut down the Erasmus nuclear warhead production facility, the guys that build warheads, if they don't have a job, are going to take that skill set elsewhere, maybe to North Korea, maybe to Iran. And so, even although I say Iran only because we think that in the West, the Iranians don't want it, but or the same thing about chemical weapons or biological. So in Ukraine, you had a number of Soviet-era biological weapons facilities that were used to produce biological weapons. And so in 2005, an agreement was signed between the Ukrainian government and the Defense Threat Reduction Agency to bring these labs under control of the United States. Even though they're under Ukrainian management, the United States would bring them under their control as part of this program for the purpose of accounting for biological pathogens that were related to former weapons programs. So the idea was you're going to bring them under control, identify them, catalog them, destroy them. And then you provide gainful employment for these scientists through defensive-oriented biological research, or just biological research in general, looking for, trying to predict future pandemics, coming up with vaccines to existing pathogens that exist in the wild, legitimate research. And that was the idea. Well, a couple things. We found out Robert Pope is a former Air Force Lieutenant Colonel who currently runs the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. He spoke, I think, either the day before or the day after the Russians went in. And he made an amazing admission. He said, it might turn out that at some of these former Soviet facilities, scientists being scientists, they may have kept some of their prior work, meaning that they have these frozen pathogen samples of actual Soviet era biological weapons. That is not permitted by treaty. The Biological Toxins Weapons Convention, Article 1, specifically prohibits the acquisition and retention of these pathogens. The United States, in signing the 2005 agreement, was now in the position where everything the Ukrainians had, the United States has now acquired. And if we don't destroy it, we have retained it. So for over 15 years, 17 years to be exact, we have been in violation of the Biological Toxin Weapons Convention simply by failing to follow through on our obligation to fully account for these pathogens and dispose of these pathogens. Now, someone can say, well, that's just an innocent accounting mistake, and I will agree with them, meaning that I understand how bureaucracies work. I understand how international relations work. I understand how human nature works, and this very well could have happened. It shouldn't have happened, but it could have happened. But that's not the biggest problem here. The biggest problem is some of the work that these labs were apparently called upon to produce. And I can tell you from my own experience, when I was a firefighter here in New York, I did hazmat. I was a hazmat specialist, which is sort of a super hazmat technician. I'm the guy that puts on the funky suit, goes in there and investigates all this stuff. And I did all the federal level courses. So I went to Anniston, Alabama, where we went through the chemical weapons course, where we actually worked with live sarin and live VX nerve agent. Now you say, well, how do you do that? Isn't that a chemical weapon? Well, we produce them at the laboratory scale to use them in these facilities as part of defensive training. But if you can produce them in small scale, you could produce them in large scale, could you not? So there's some question about whether or not this actually conforms with, and now the United States being the United States, we make our own rules. Remember the rules-based international order. And therefore we say, no, it's okay because we know we don't have any nefarious intent. We wouldn't allow Iraq to do this because we assume they have nefarious intent. We assume anybody who had a similar program to ours is obviously simply creating the conditions for a breakout chemical weapons. But in the United States, no, we're okay. Don't worry. Remember that anthrax that was used in the aftermath of 9/11?
Yeah.
It was produced in Dugway at a similar facility where they produce anthrax for testing purposes, for defensive purposes. The same thing. The firefighters go to Anniston and undergo biological training where they're exposed to live botulinum, live anthrax. And you say, well, wait a minute, how do we have that? That's a weapon. Well, no, it's only for training. Well, apparently a tube of it, because it's produced as a paste, dry powder paste, the tube got away and the guy was able to put it in envelopes and spread it around. It was the most highly refined anthrax in the world. Very dangerous stuff. came from that laboratory. So we produce chemical weapons, we produce biological weapons just as a matter of fact. This is without even Ukraine. So understand that we take this American approach, which is very footloose and fancy-free when it comes to the law that's set down with the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Biological Toxin Weapons Convention, et cetera. And we come to Ukraine. Why, if all we're doing is defensive research or basic biological research, is there a program that investigates avian flu? That's bird flu. And you remember, one of the original pandemics was HN1, I think, bird flu. So we're investigating bird flu and how it can be vectored, transported using migratory birds whose migratory pattern takes them exclusively into Russia, carrying a form of avian flu that has been genetically engineered only to impact Russian Slavic DNA. Specifically says no Ukrainian DNA can be used here because we don't want to spread it amongst the Ukrainians in case one of those infected birds lands. And now, I'm not saying the United States actually did this, but the Russians have I'm not saying they actually weaponized this, put them in birds and flew these birds into Russia. What I'm saying is they researched it. And how is that not an offensive biological weapons program? How is that not something that would cause, if we found out that the Russians were in Mexico and that they had developed a strain of the bird flu that they could put on sand cranes, knowing that the sand cranes were going to fly north to their nesting areas in the United States, carrying a strain of bird flu that was engineered only for Anglo-Saxon Americans. Would we not view that as an assault on the United States? Of course, Canada would, because some of these sand cranes go up to Canada. Imagine if they landed in Canada and suddenly all your Anglo-Saxons in Canada got sick with the bird flu and started dying in massive numbers because it's been genetically engineered. You'd call that an act of war. So the United States has been caught out on this one. Now, if there's a legitimate explanation for this, please make it. But right now, I say this as an American, I'm on the Russian side on this one because I'm on the side of truth. And the Russians have the documents. The United States can't sit here and call this a manufactured event. The documents exist. They have specific, unique identifying features that will match the similar set of documents here in the United States. And if Congress ever did a legitimate inquiry into this, they would find that things have been done in the U.S. taxpayer money and the U.S. name that violate every treaty obligation we have and undermines the moral authority of the United States to ever again stand up in front of the world and say, we stand for the rule of law. We don't. Not if we did this. Not if we did this.
Is that, I think that's why we saw the censorship imposed immediately after the Russians began to pull those documents out.
It's look, this is an embarrassment. Now, the United States being the United States, we're no longer the land of the free and the home of the brave, because to be free, you have to have freedom of speech. To be free, you have to engage in a fact-based debate, discussion, and dialogue about very difficult issues. That's what free people do. Right now, we aren't unable to do that, because the United States is imposing a de facto censorship on issues such as this biological lab. And if you avoid those kind of difficult discussions, you're a coward. You're not brave. A brave person isn't afraid to face the hard facts. A brave person, a man or woman of courage, insists on the hard facts because they want to do the right thing, and you can't do the right thing unless you have fact-based data put before you. But if you censor that, you deny that, you refuse to engage in that discussion, you're not free and you're not brave. So America is no longer the land of the free and the home of the brave. Hate to say that.
I mean, look at Tulsi Gabbard, where she more or less made a humanity-based appeal to everybody, saying, like, look, there's labs there. We're not going to get into are these biolabs or whatever, but whatever it is these labs are there. There's going to be, if any of these strains get out of the lab, there's going to be another pandemic. But then hours after that, The View comes out and says, "Oh, we used to jail people like this." It's like, okay,
yeah,
these people want to live under.
So you got what was it? Whoopi Goldberg,
yeah,
Anna Navarro, and I forget who the third person was.
Was Joy Behar?
Oh,
is she on there still?
Yeah, she's on there.
She's on, but I can't remember who the third person was. But they're talking about, you know, imprisoning Americans. They want to arrest. They want to put the hand. Try it. You know, there's enough Americans that still understand what their constitutional rights are and understand what tyranny is. And first of all, again, to compare these people with Tulsi Gabbard, she's a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Reserve who has served in combat, who has served her nation honorably, and she's simply exercising as a civilian, as a private citizen, not in her capacity as a serving officer, her First Amendment right of freedom of speech to ask legitimate questions about difficult topics. And now you have Whoopi Goldberg, who hasn't done anything in her life of note other than act. I'm not going to denigrate her as an actress or a comedian. She's good. I've seen some of her movies. They're good. I've seen other movies. They're not so good. But she has a profession. She does it. God bless her. She doesn't even qualify to be in the same grid as Tulsi Gabbard when it comes to real Americans. The same thing with Ana Navarro. I mean, she's a Republican, political consultant. Neither of them have served in the military. Neither of them have sacrificed it all for their country. They make a living sitting back and sniping at people like Tulsi Gabbard, who every year puts it all on the line for her country. Why more Americans aren't just outraged by this behavior? It doesn't mean that you have to support Tulsi Gabbard's words. No, you don't. She has a right to speak. I have a right to disagree. But what I won't do, first of all, I say I tend to agree with her. So it's not that I'm saying I'm against her, but I could disagree with her and that doesn't make me un-American. But what I won't do is attack her character. What I will do is say, I heard Tulsi say X, Y, and Z, and I disagree because of A, B, and C. And then Tulsi can come back and say, yes, but there's, H-I-J, and I can say, yes, but there's A-L-M, and we can have a nice little alphabet discussion about, what's the better course of action. That's how democracy is supposed to work. That's how it's supposed to work. I always refer to, Norman Rockwell did famous 4 paintings, the 4 freedoms, I think he called them. And, freedom of speech, freedom from hunger, freedom from the one about speech shows that man sitting, I think it's in a Vermont church where a town gathering is taking place. And he's standing up and he's holding a document in his hand and he's speaking. He's not angry. But he's speaking. He's serious. And the people are looking at him, listening to him. And on the other side of the church is another person, a man or a woman, who's holding a document who's going to stand up when he's done, and they're going to speak. And they may be in opposition. And everybody in the church is going to look at them and listen to them. And you're going to have your chance to be heard, to have your opinion considered by well-meaning citizens who respect your right to say what you're saying, and then they will collectively decide what's best for the community. And you may not win. You may only get part of what you want, but it will be fair. That's what Tulsi's doing. She's that person standing up, speaking. But we've lost the ability in the United States to be the receptive audience. We've lost the ability to sit there and listen with respect to what somebody's saying. And then when it's time to disagree, if we do disagree, to stand up and respectfully and with fact and without passion, meaning evil passion. You can be passionate, but you don't have to be yelling. You don't have to demean people. Tell them, this is why I disagree with you. That's what makes a democracy great. Mm-hmm. We've lost that greatness because we've lost the ability to do that. Instead, we have Whoopi Goldberg and Ana Navarro pretending that somehow they have the right to arrest Tulsi Gabbard for speaking her mind about an issue of national importance. It's insane.
How important do we even know if these labs have been secured, if these materials are still at risk of?
The Russians apparently have captured some that were in their ability to capture. The ones that they couldn't capture, my understanding, got hit with thermobaric type weapons. One of the things that Robert Pope spoke of when he spoke of these, again, the director of the defense agency responsible for these labs, one of the things he said was, we're worried that they'll lose power, because right now the pathogens are frozen. They're kept in secure frozen storage. They lose power, and then there will be an explosion that somehow causes a violation of the environmental containment, and these pathogens will thaw and then be released. And he's very concerned about that. Well, I think the Russians were too, because from what I understand, a couple of these places were hit with thermobaric weapons, which create these giant fireballs that create this vacuum that would suck everything up into it and burn it. If I were planning on destroying a biolab or a chemical production facility, I would use a thermobaric weapon. Apparently, the Russians use thermobaric weapons on some of these labs. Not all of them. I don't know if there's some labs that are still in the under the control of the Ukrainian government. I do know that at least 2 of these labs have been captured intact by the Russians, and this is why they have all the documents that they have.
So this is yeah, I am petrified, honestly. I'm afraid of those biolabs. I'm afraid of the possibility of a nuclear war, and I think we're just closer to a nuclear conflict than ever before. Even I think it's a more dangerous situation than even we faced during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that really is I think the closest comparison in my view. What is that? Do you share that, or am I missing something?
The Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, the thing about the Cuban Missile Crisis is that had there been a nuclear conflict, it was containable because simply for the fact that we didn't have all the nuclear weapons that we had 20 years later, meaning that we would have lost a couple American cities, they would have lost a couple Russian cities, and that sort of would have been it. The world might have been able to live on, might have, no guarantees. 1983, there was a military exercise called Able Archer, and it was a test of the NATO nuclear war plan. And the problem is going into Able Archer is that the Russians had said, we're concerned that that NATO might launch a preemptive strike and hit us with nuclear weapons first. And so they had their intelligence services out there listening. And suddenly they catch this exercise. It's called an exercise. But they're listening to the communications and they're moving nuclear weapons. And then they're giving launch codes. And the Russians went, oh my God, and they actually put their nuclear forces on alert. And we were that close to the Russians saying, they've issued the launch orders, we have to launch in return. When Ronald Reagan found out about this later on, the CIA, did some research and wrote a paper for him. I think he saw it sometime in 1984, 1985. According to the people that were there, they said he turned pale and he was sick to his stomach. And he said, my God, how could they believe that we would do this? Well, they believed it because you ran a darn exercise testing the ability to do just that. And Reagan said, we have to, and that was the beginning of the INF Treaty. That was when Ronald Reagan said, we have to get rid of these weapons because this is insane. Insane that we almost got to that based on an accident. And then I think it was 2 years later where the Norwegians fired this rocket, this atmosphere test rocket, but it was detected by the Russians and came across as a massive ICBM attack. And the Russian officer in the command center looked at this, and according to the book, he was supposed to make the call to launch. But he looked at it and he said, it makes no sense. What I'm seeing makes no sense. We're going to wait. And people went, you can't wait, because if you wait, and that's the nukes, they're going to kill us all. And he said, we're going to wait. And sure enough, it was found out to be a test of mistake. He was arrested initially and charged with treason because he violated the standing orders. And you can't, in the nuclear weapons business, you can't have somebody free thinking like that, because then nuclear deterrence is meaningless. Thank God we had somebody who was free thinking like that. I'd like to believe that his American counterparts would have done the same thing. But that's why they have pistols down there. Because if somebody decides they don't want to do their job, you're supposed to point the pistol at them. And if they still don't want to do it, you kill them and then replace them with somebody who's going to do the dual key launch of the weapons. Isn't that insane? We need to get rid of these weapons. We need to get rid of a situation where a fellow human has to point a gun at a countryman to make him commit global suicide, because that's what's happening when you launch nuclear weapons. It's global.
The thing that really scares me is some of the propaganda that I've been seeing, even today. Another article on Quora, the loose talk among some hawks that seem to want to use these weapons. And then I'm also seeing stories telling people that a nuclear war today wouldn't be that bad, that all you'd really have to, the worst that would happen is some military bases would be blown up and you just have to stay inside for a week or two and lock down, and then things would be okay. That's what scares me. Is it, or am I out of touch? Am I still stuck in the 80s and brainwashed because I was afraid?
Well, I mean, you know, 200,000 degrees is 200,000 degrees, whether it's generated by a 1980s era nuclear weapon or a nuclear weapon today. I don't understand. Nuclear weapons didn't get suddenly copacetic and family friendly. They're as horrible today as they were back then. What's even worse, though, is back then we at least operated honestly. The concept of mutually assured destruction. We all knew what was going on. There was no concept of winning a nuclear war. You had strategic theorists talking about that you could have an exchange, a correlation, and we could maintain enough Americans alive to sustain civilized society. Therefore, we won the war. No, trust me, it's not winning the war. Now we have people who actually think in terms of limited nuclear warfare, especially when it comes to the Russians. To give you an example, there was a speech given by a guy named Gerasimov, General Gerasimov. Today he's the head of the general staff of the Russian army. But Gerasimov gave a speech, and it was translated by this analyst who misunderstood what Gerasimov was saying. And what he did is he captured the main points in what he called the Gerasimov doctrine. Well, Gerasimov, this wasn't a Russian doctrine. Gerasimov was speaking, if you want to call it the Gerasimov doctrine, was Gerasimov's understanding of what NATO's doctrine was against Russia. And one of the principal concepts of there is the notion of escalate to de-escalate, meaning that as a situation starts to move towards confrontation, the one side will escalate. And then what you'll do is you'll use a nuclear weapon to escalate above them to compel them to de-escalate. And the Russians, this was never Russian doctrine, but it became interpreted as that's what the Russians are going to do. So we have to out-escalate them. So what we did is we developed something called the low-yield nuclear warhead for the Trident submarine. And we put it on our Trident submarines. And now our Trident submarines are, of course, out there in the North Sea. And we actually war gamed a scenario where the Russians moved in on the Baltics and they escalated. And so in order to stop this, we had to escalate to de-escalate. So we would fire a low-yield nuclear warhead on the Russian forces, telling them that it's over now. Okay, no more, you're going to quit. This is in theory. We built the warhead, we put it on the submarine, and then we had a war game where Defense Secretary Esper pushed the damn button, simulating nuclear launch authority against, they were firing a weapon in the exercise against Russian troops. That's insane. Now, Putin listened to this, again, God bless Putin. He listened to it and he said, you guys are crazy because we don't have escalate to de-escalate. What we have is anybody who fires a single nuclear weapon against Russia will get all of our weapons in return. We'll all be dead, but some of us will be martyrs, meaning the Russians will be dead, but at least they're going to heaven as the good guys, not the bad guys. That's the reality. But because we are so distanced from the Cold War, we have lost several things. One, we have lost the generation of arms control experts who were capable of negotiating these sound arms treaties. We no longer have arms controllers. We had a whole cadre of people like me, better than me, weapons inspectors, trained weapons inspectors, arms control verification specialists, people who are certified as foreign area officers of a Soviet or Russian subspecialty. They're gone. We don't have these people anymore. We used to have in the State Department people that grew up in the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. And even though they disbanded that agency, their expertise was still handled out to non-proliferation. We used to have something called the Arms Control Intelligence Staff in the CIA, whose sole focus was arms control treaties, arms control agreements, intelligence support of arms control agreements. They're all gone. We don't have them anymore. And what we have instead are people who have been recruited not because of their Russian expertise, but because they wrote a college term paper on how evil Vladimir Putin is. End of story. Fiona Hill, her only qualification, it isn't Russian expertise, it's authoritarian government. She hates Vladimir Putin. Susan Glasser hates Vladimir Putin. Ann Applebaum hates Vladimir Putin. Michael McFaul hates Vladimir Putin. I can go down the entire list of all these talking heads who are out there. They hate Vladimir Putin. The CIA used to have people that would run Moscow Station, the most important CIA station in the whole network of stations around the world. These were the best of the best, the elite. They played by Moscow rules. Tough game, recruiting spies, etc. We used to recruit people like Oleg Tolkachev, the billion-dollar spy who gave us access to Soviet radar technology that saved us billions of dollars and being able to defeat the MiG-25 before it became the MiG-25. Then the Cold War ended, and we disbanded all these guys. We put them into retirement, and we replaced them with a bunch of amateurs, a bunch of yahoos, guys who don't have Russian expertise. And, they didn't treat the Russians seriously either, because during the 1990s, espionage was a joke. Because you didn't have to spy. You just went to the Russians and bribed them. We bought the darn president. We bought every aspect of Russia. Things were given to us for free. And suddenly Putin comes in and puts the kibosh on that. And now we have to play the game, but we don't have anybody qualified to play the game. That's why in 2005, 2006, 2007, over and over again, you see the entire CIA station being kicked out of Russia because they got rolled up trying to do Cold War type espionage, but they're no longer trained to do it. They're no longer qualified to do it. You have non-Russian experts going in there, who cut their teeth on espionage in Serbia or in Georgia, playing minor leagues, and now they get thrown into the major leagues overnight, and they got rolled up. There's no intelligence success in Russia, none. The Russian FSB, the security forces, are kicking our butts. They're kicking Canada's butts. They're kicking Britain's butt. Nobody has good access to the Russian target anymore because we don't know how to spy anymore. We're not very good at it. Yet, turn on the TV, and you're going to see him there, Stephen Hall, former CIA station chief, John Cipher, former head of Russian op. These guys are the most incompetent spies that ever walked the face of the earth. They have no significant espionage victories against the Russian target. They got rolled up, they got defeated, and yet they're on TV waxing philosophically about a target that they didn't understand well enough to succeed in. The only thing they have in common is they all have a visceral hatred for Vladimir Putin. And if you think Putin defines Russia, you know nothing about Russia. Russia defines Russia. Mm-hmm. Russia defines Putin, not the other way around.
Yes, and it's a big place too, right?
It's huge.
It's not only diverse geographically, it's diverse in the amount of different people who live there.
Absolutely.
Whether it's Siberia, the Taiga land, or goes on and on and on.
When I was an inspector, the factory that we worked at was the Votkinsk factory. It produced SS-25 ICBMs. It used to produce the SS-20 intermediate range missile along with some others. But it was in the Udmurt Republic, which meant that, it's named after an ethnicity, the Udmurt people, who are a Finnic people. But they also had Tatars, because right below it was the Tatar Autonomous Republic. Over here was the Bashkir Republic. So you had the Bashkirs. Then up north, you had another ethnic group. The point is, they all mingled together. The Russians and all these people lived together as Soviet citizens. Today, they're Russian citizens. And then in the cities, you had everything. You had Georgians, Armenians, Ukrainians, Balts, Belarusians, all the different ethnicities come together because the Soviet Union was this giant melting pot where people came in and worked in Soviet institutes because they had an education and they were recruited. People don't understand just how diverse Russia is in terms of its ethnicities.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think is the best possible outcome at this point, and what's the worst possible outcome?
Well, when you talk about best possible outcome, I think we can't look at it from an American perspective or a Russian perspective because they're incompatible. Mm-hmm. And so the best outcome for one would not be a good outcome for the other, and that would just perpetuate conflict. We have to look at the one that resolves the primary reason for this clash of culture, and it will be one that combines a new European security framework that's along the lines of what Russia wants with a Russian decoupling from the West. The United States has lost the ability to influence Russia economically. Russia will never fall for that, not in Putin's lifetime, not in anybody's lifetime. Who knows, maybe 100 years from now, the world changes. But right now, there needs to be an economic divorce between Russia and the West. That doesn't mean total. I mean, Russia will still sell energy, still sell strategic minerals. But the day of going to Moscow and seeing, Louis Vuitton and all the Western shop is over. You're going to see whatever the Chinese equivalent is, whatever the Indian equivalent is. Russia is going east, man. It's going to be Trans-Eurasian Economic Union. So that's the big thing, is to set up a Trans-Eurasian Economic Union that keeps Russia economically focused to the east. That way, there's no temptation on the part of the West to exploit its economic presence, because there won't be an economic presence. But that, if you leave it just at that, what you have is a divorce without, child visitation rights. There's got to be child visitation rights. And the equivalent of that is a new European security framework that has NATO continuing to exist, but has NATO withdrawn back to 1997 boundaries, and Russia withdrawing from Belarus and creating this sort of a band of neutrality that will separate NATO from Russia. And I think there will have to be some sort of conventional forces in Europe treaty where Russia will leave some forces there that are the equivalent of the national forces of Poland and the Baltic states, Romania, but nothing overwhelming, nothing that could be used to launch an attack. Equivalent defensive forces, and then withdraw its offensive capability further west towards Moscow, maybe even east of Moscow, so that in order for Russia to accumulate military power sufficient to threaten these buffer states, they would have to mobilize, they'd have to move, it would be detectable. I think you have a treaty where you have inspectors, observers there, so there will be no surprise attack. I think there has to be that kind of framework. There has to be an arms control agreement that eliminates the possibility of intermediate nuclear forces ever again emerging on European soil. And I think this is possible. This is something that can happen. And the beauty of these treaty relationships is that they transcend politics. When I was a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union, Ronald Reagan was still talking about the evil empire. We were still spending billions of dollars to build weapons to destroy the Soviet Union. They were spending billions of dollars to build weapons to destroy us. But on the ground, there were these Americans, Cold Warriors like myself, working with their Soviet counterparts who were Cold Warriors. And we were working together to achieve something of mutual benefit. And I don't know if we're ever going to have a situation where the United States and Russia are friends, not for some time to come. I think that bridge has been burned. But we don't have to be enemies. And I think these arms control agreements could create a class of professional disarmament specialists who work for the mutual benefit of their countries and mankind. And that to me is the best possible outcome. I don't think we're going to have piss up and make up. I think that's over. I think the West has behaved egregiously, horribly. And Russia isn't going to invite them back in. But Russia is going to have to make some sort of conciliatory move to ensure that the divorce is as amicable as possible. That's why I call it child visitation rights. There has to be some sort of mechanism where husband and wife can get together and share air kisses and be nice to the kids. Because other than that, you're going to have arms races. And it's just going to increase the potential for friction that could lead to conflict, could lead to the ultimate conflict.
It seems to me like after the Ukrainian people, who have suffered incredible losses and continue to suffer, the United States and Canada look like they're in a big no-win situation at the end of all this too, because we're suffering already economically, and if Russia realigns more with China, I don't see any positive outcome for us at all.
No, I think the best we can hope for is, again, the Russians haven't played any of their cards from the economic standpoint. None. They've reacted. They've done defensive measures designed to mitigate the impact of the harm. They've talked about doing things. For instance, all of the Western oil companies that fled Russia. Russia's talking about legislation that will basically nationalize the hundreds of billions of dollars of investment made into the Russian energy sector. That's how stupid the West is right now. Gee, thank you for giving us $100 billion worth of free infrastructure. And Russia will do things like that. But Russia hasn't permanently stopped the sale of energy or the research. I mean, everybody has one of these things. You don't have one of these if Russia stops selling cobalt and there's another element that they control. They stop selling that. We don't have the chips anymore. We can't manufacture them. Done. Finished. And, the electronics industry is all about the chip. And without the chip, you got no electronic industry, which means we have none of this, no internet, no computers, no nothing. Russia hasn't played hardball yet. They could.
Yeah.
Russia literally controls the global economy on very specific minerals and metals of interest.
And don't forget crap. And by crap, I mean manure, but that's an important one, I think.
Fertilizer, yeah.
Fertilizer, yeah.
Fertilizer, yeah. Oh, and wheat.
And wheat.
Wheat. Now, Canada and the United States aren't going to go hungry because we can produce our own food. But
quick enough, though?
I don't know. But the world's going to starve. And who's going to be to blame? Not Russia. The United States and Canada to be blamed. Australia is going to suffer. Look, we've started a ball rolling that we don't understand where it's, we started a process, we don't know where it's going to end. And we've pretty much ceded much of the control over how this ends to Russia. And I think the Russians are playing it smart. They're paying a heavy price up front, but leaving open, leaving the West an escape route by not shutting down the energy, by not shutting down the minerals, by maintaining this lifeline between the two economies, so that there can be a modicum of restructuring and reconstruction. But like I said, I'd be shocked if there's ever a Louis Vuitton shop opening up in Moscow,
or a McDonald's, which
that's
I think
the
is
best thing that ever happened to the Russian people.
Yeah. Did you guys hear that? I guess they are looting all the warehouses where McDonald's has stored all their food and stuff. They've been looting it and selling it abroad and being. I thought that was interesting.
Well, again, any nation, Russia is a contract-oriented society. And I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying that they put a lot of faith in the value of a contract, in an agreement, and what the West has done through these sanctions is violate all these agreements, violate these contracts. And once you do that, then the Russians no longer respect, your property because it's no longer your property. You've basically walked away. So I'm not surprised that they're doing that.
Yeah,
I mean, what did you expect them to do?
Yeah, that's
Preserve
good.
it for your return?
I'm sure it would have stayed good that long.
Well, Scott, do you have any final thoughts as we move toward wrapping this thing up for the night?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to come up with something positive because we've had a very difficult conversation. I mean, this is a difficult subject. And I can't come up with anything positive. I mean, my heart goes out to the people of Ukraine. They are truly the sacrificial pawns in all of this. They're paying, a horrific price. Their country is being destroyed. What the final price tag will be horrific. Whether it's 500 billion, $1 trillion. Ukraine is finished as a modern nation state for some time, and this is sad. It's very sad. I don't think the world's learning its lesson. My biggest fear is if we survive Ukraine, Taiwan's going to be the next. China is going to move on Taiwan. China will recapture Taiwan. And I think the Chinese now are getting a big lesson. Any notion that Taiwan would just readily receive them. I think the Russians were operating under a little misconception that they would be received well, at least a significant portion of the population. And that's why they went in soft. I think the Chinese are looking at this and saying, we have to plan for it being hard from day one. And then they now know how the West is going to respond. So China's getting a nice little preview of what's going to happen. And the Chinese are smart, they're capable, and they're going to make the appropriate preparations. And the West is going to be hit by lightning and not have any clue what happened as the Chinese preempt every possible Western response. And I don't mean nuclear war. I think economically, the Chinese start to shut down supply lines. And basically, I think you'll see a preemption to what's going to start the Chinese invasion will be preemptive acts on their part to segregate themselves from the Western economy, to put the West on the defense economically so that there's no punch left in the West when China makes the move on Taiwan. But there's no doubt in my mind that China's moving on Taiwan. In a year, in 2 years, it's going to happen.
And we saw how impotent Biden is with regard to Ukraine. I mean, he can't go in there with soldiers. What about Taiwan? Same thing, right?
Well, let's look at the closest analogy that we have. South Korea. We have a military relationship with South Korea. We train with them. We have 10,000 soldiers already there, and we've earmarked units from the United States who will be deployed. I think the total number is 400,000. It will take 90 days for those troops to get to South Korea with all of the preparation we've done with pre-positioned stocks, having bases in Japan and elsewhere to support. None of this exists with Taiwan. None. There's no infrastructure. There's no planning. There's no troops earmarked. What, you're going to say, well, no, we're going to just reevaluate our South Korean defense plan and take all those 400,000 troops and send them to Taiwan? No, because that opens up North Korea to now make a move on South Korea. So we're literally going to be standing there saying there's nothing we can do, just like we did with Ukraine. There's nothing we can do. Can we fly in a couple airplanes worth of weapons? Maybe. I don't know if the Chinese are going to be as friendly regarding weapon shipments as the Russians have been. Meaning, I think probably sink ships, shoot down airplanes, because we got nothing. We literally have nothing when it comes to Taiwan. There is no option.
Canada just admitted that we have depleted our weapons stock dangerously. That we have nothing.
Yeah, well, we just gave it all away.
Yeah.
Well, the people of Lugansk and Donetsk, thank you, because apparently the Russians are capturing all this stuff and turning it over to the People's Militia in Donetsk and Lugansk. So they're going to have the largest javelin inventory in the world.
And in that way, I think NATO and the United States have sort of led Ukraine and maybe now Taiwan too down the garden path by sort of offering them this false sense of security.
Yep. And if I was the Taiwan government, I'd be looking at this saying, we probably need to preempt this by going to China and saying, how can we do this without doing that? Okay, because I have no confidence now in the United States or anybody coming to our rescue. So how do we achieve an outcome that avoids what's happening to Ukraine right now? That's what I would do if I were Taiwan, because otherwise you're just going to get Ukraine with an Asian flavor.
Times
And so
10.
And so I guess the bottom line is this is a monumental, colossal foreign policy failure on the part of the Biden
100%.
administration.
Well, remember, he inherited this. This is a failure of American foreign policy.
Right.
Our Ukraine policy started with George W. Bush. Barack Obama, 8 years of the wonderful Barack Obama administration. They're the ones who implemented regime change policy in Ukraine. They're the ones, through Michael McFaul, was seeking regime change. You remember the Great Reset, the nice little red button? Okay, that was being pushed not to help Vladimir Putin, but to help Dmitry Medvedev in hopes that we could prop him up to remove Vladimir Putin. It was regime change. And Putin knows this. That's why when Hillary Clinton suddenly went, oh my gosh, Medvedev's stepping down, Putin's coming up, he's running for election, and she spoke out asking the Russian people to rise up. But Putin saying, you're interfering with our election, with my election. And he was furious about that. That's why he hates her. But Michael McFaul was implementing regime change policy under Obama. And Trump came in with whatever the hell that was. I don't even know what his, it was just schizophrenic, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. No rhyme or reason for anything that was going on with Russia. His heart was in the right place. He wanted to be friends, but he didn't do anything friendly. It just chaos. And now Biden's come in trying to correct that, but it's an overcorrection. And it's just a disaster, an absolute disaster. The people paying the price are the Ukrainian people, and the people that pay the price in Asia will be the Taiwan, the citizens of Taiwan. And on that positive note, all I could say is, at least Canada and America remain friendly.
For now.
For the moment. Until you guys get tired of us and decide to just invade and end it.
Oh, well.
Well, all you have
we
to
just
do
gave
is
all
watch...
our weapons away, so not much chance for that.
All you have to do is watch Canadian Bacon. You'll
okay.
Watch that movie.
Well, Scott Ritter, thank you so much for joining us on the program tonight. I've been watching the comments. We didn't put a lot of them up. We've had thousands of people commenting, though I can see on the side here, and they love you. They a lot of people saying, that your words have been very helpful, and
well, then that's a success. I mean, it's even being unpleasant. I think the pursuit of fact-based data is it shows intellectual curiosity, and that's the most important, I think, characteristic a person can have nowadays, is at least the curiosity to try and find the truth.
Well, especially now because there's so much propaganda on both sides, and when people do speak truth, I think that, we're seeing attempts in the media to discredit people who say anything that isn't in line with the media narrative, right? So it's a brave thing that you're doing, actually, joining us, because it's hard right now to speak about facts.
There's a potential risk here. There's a downside. You didn't tell me this going in.
I think we're all wearing the same target on our backs tonight. But again, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
It was a pleasure to meet
our
you,
privilege.
Sir.
Our absolute privilege.
Well,
thank you.
Let's do it again if you ever are in the mood.
All right. Thank you, Scott. I'll take you up on that.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye for now.
All the best. Thank you.
And there you have it, Scott Ritter. That was a privilege, and great perspective, information that you're not going to get certainly from watching network television now.
Television shows like The View, you're not going to get it from there.
Yeah. That's real expertise, and as we've seen in the comments here tonight, a lot of people just praising what he was saying just because it is.
Well, not only did he bring his military expertise in there, he's actually been in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, well, he says he's not an expert. I disagree. I think he's very much an expert, and that's why I contacted him. And just huge help to help us get that much closer to the truth. I think because it just gives us a much better perspective on everything going on.
No, I feel like I have a much better perspective on this whole situation coming out of there.
Yeah, and it has been, well, it's been a long program tonight, and I think every minute of it's been worth it. And if you can support us so we can continue to do this kind of work and bring you those kinds of interviews, you can donate to us at freedomreporters.com. Click the hot link in the YouTube, Facebook descriptions, and also on Rumble. And please subscribe to us on Rumble, because that's where the target isn't as large on our backs. That's where we will likely end up surviving if we ever are kicked off YouTube and Facebook, and that certainly seems to be a possibility these days. So subscribe, like, share, ring the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any of our episodes. And
if you haven't seen yesterday's episode, I really recommend that you take a look at that. We had Rachel Emmanuel from the Western Standard, and she talks about her exodus from mainstream media. So that was definitely an insightful conversation. We've had a full week of very insightful conversations, I would say. This has been monumental to our channel, I would say, this whole week.
Yeah, probably. I think in terms of content, our best week so far.
Yeah.
Great guests, and that's why.
Hands down.
Yeah, like Scott.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll definitely have to have him back on at some point. I'm sure this Ukraine situation is going to take some twists and turns, and it's going to redraw the geopolitical landscape before it's all over with. In the end, I think the world is going to end up looking very, very different, and let's just hope that it doesn't spiral out of control to the point where those nukes are used, because that we just can't allow that to happen.
Well, I'll definitely say this, based off of our conversation with Scott there, the West is not getting out of this without egg on its face.
Oh, we're in so much trouble.
Yeah.
We are in so much trouble. You think high gas prices are a big problem now? Mm-hmm. We ain't seen nothing yet, I don't think.
Exactly.
That we've shot ourselves in the foot. This is a disaster, and I don't see any positive outcome for Canada or the United States in any of this in the end. I just don't see it.
Nope, they've made a turd sandwich at this point, and now somebody's going to have to eat it, and it probably isn't going to be Putin.
Yeah. And with that being said, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'll be back on tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with more on the Maverick News Channel. We are the Freedom Reporters. We are the antivirus program for your mind. And I'll throw it over to Brendan to say his goodbyes.
All right. Well, yeah, I do have obligations this weekend, so I unfortunately cannot be here, but I will be thinking of you, and I will be missing you. And I can't wait to come back on Monday. Fresh start and hammer back at it. Once again, I'm the co-host here at Maverick News, Brendan Kennedy. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great weekend.
And catch you all on the flip side.